All right, if I could just get folks moving to their seats. We've got a busy afternoon. I know there may be some folks outside mingling. We'll get started here in just a minute. Where's our... First up, we're going to have Brad Carver. Brad, I saw you earlier. Okay. Tell everybody. We got everybody coming in. Robert. Thank you. Okay, we're going to try to go ahead and get started, y'all. If I could get former Chairman Shaw over there to sit down and quit talking. We're going to go ahead and get started. We've got a busy afternoon. I know some of you are still getting settled in, but next up, we've got Brad Carver and the Georgia Large Scale Solar Association and the Advanced Power Alliance, Jeff Clark. Brad, thank you for bringing your folks in and coming to talk to us more about your side of all this solar stuff. So appreciate you being here and look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. We're proud to be here today, too. I represent the Georgia Large Scale Solar Association and the Advanced Power Alliance. Started representing the large scale solar, which is the mouthpiece of the utility scale solar industry in Georgia back in 2015. And if you notice the Georgia Power presentation, right before that, that's when you first started seeing some measurable amounts of solar on the grid here in Georgia. And that actually came out of the 2013 IRP, where Commissioner Eccles, Commissioner McDonald, and former Commissioner Doug Everett voted for 525 megawatts, and in that procurement, it was utility scale procurement. And from that time, we have seen significant growth of utility scale solar in Georgia. And the reason, as you've heard from the last two presentations from both Georgia Power and Georgia EMC, is because of the price point. It's significantly below avoided cost. It is frankly the best low-cost energy solution that's out there. That comes from the economies of scale, but it's really putting Georgia in a great place. We've dubbed this a long time ago red state solar. So you heard earlier today from our good professor about how not to do things in the state of Georgia, and that's do it like California has done. Georgia has taken a very different approach when it comes to solar power, and it's been with focusing on competitive bid procurements and doing it in a way that without state subsidies, but relying on federal incentives and leveraging those federal incentives to the greatest extent possible. As we all know, after that money is appropriated, it's appropriated. And we feel from the state of Georgia perspective, we should try to maximize that for ratepayer value to the greatest extent possible. As we all know, we're the #1 state to do business. If we do not stay focused on economic development and renewable energy being part of that, then remaining a #1 state to do business is something that could be potentially put in jeopardy. So I want to applaud, we have Madam Chair Pridemore, Commissioner Shaw here today, the leadership of the Public Service Commission in our energy planning process, which they do through integrated resource planning, which the General Assembly put in place back in the 1990s, has been phenomenal. And it is the reason why when these commissioners go to NARUC and meet with fellow commissioners across the country, they're applauded for the way we have approached this in the state of Georgia. So you've heard this many times already today, but it's really an all-resource strategy in Georgia. And for us, as you're going to see in this presentation today, solar is the best option for us. Wind is not something that we have a lot of potential for in Georgia, but solar is phenomenal. When you see the map, you'll see that most all of Georgia, except for extreme northwest Georgia, is good for solar, but in particular, South Georgia is. And that's because of the flat land and low cost of real estate, that it puts Georgia in a competitive position to see those 3-cent PPA signed, which what that ultimately does is it lowers the price for all of our energy consumers across the state. So we're seeing the EMCs do this, we're seeing the electric cities do this, we're seeing MEAG do it through its processes, and the great lion's share of the megawatts that are procured are from the utility scale arena. So I did want to make one final comment because the issue of natural gas has come up. As y'all all know, we have seen some rises in those prices. They've come back down, and it's about $6 a decatherm in the United States. That price in Europe is $50 a decatherm today. There is huge demand for natural gas, as we all know. And as the commissioners know, we brought this issue up in the 2019 IRP, because one of the things you don't want to do is put all your eggs in the natural gas basket either. Remember, there's huge demands for natural gas for direct use, residential, commercial, industrial, and being able to have that gas available for direct use of natural gas is also critically important. And not to mention, from a strategic standpoint, the more natural gas that we have available, the more we can export to Europe, which can make a tremendous amount of money for the United States, but it's also in our strategic interest to counterbalance Russia and everything that we're seeing over there. So again, I think that we all know and we all recognize having an all-resource strategy like what the Public Service has adopted is bringing great dividends to the state. And with that, I'd like to bring Jeff Clark up here from the Advanced Power Alliance, and also have Ryan Sanders from the Georgia Large Scale Solar Association here as well. Jeff?
And I think are you going to change slides? Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon, and thank you. And it's good to be with you. Thanks for the invitation. Georgia Large Scale Solar Association, which many of you know and have worked with over the years, has been working with the Advanced Power Alliance over the last years, and we're in the process of finalizing our marriage, if you will. And the Advanced Power Alliance is going to continue on and be representing the utility scale industry in the Southeast United States, which I'm very excited about. I grew up in Virginia, Georgia, Alabama, and Texas, and I'm slowly just building my way home. But I live in Austin, Texas now, and we have teams in all of the states we cover. We cover the Southwest Power Pool, we cover ERCOT, and now we've expanded to the Southeast, so it's a pleasure to be with you. This is a little bit of who we are as an organization. We represent some of the world's largest energy investors. There's six of the world's 10 largest natural gas purchasers are members of ours. We're very honored to have companies like Southern Power, Duke, and NextEra, in our utility sector who are also members of ours, and we have a very unique approach. I think being based outside of Washington, D.C., being based outside of New York, our approach to energy, we are in places that have energy. And so we have a very unique approach. This is a little bit of who we are. And Brad mentioned natural gas. We have a very long track record. The Sierra Club said I'm the master of greenwashing. Well, I take that as a compliment. We believe in natural gas, renewable energy. We believe in building infrastructure. We believe pipelines and power lines get American energy moving, use what we need to have the strongest economy in the world, and get the rest on ships to our allies. And that's our approach. We used to say all of the above. We have a new message. Our new message is more of everything, because I don't think we can produce enough energy to meet the world's demand, but we're going to try. Okay. This is and I'll try to be brief, but very quickly, this is generally our philosophy. We don't believe there's any one resource that can do everything well. I'm not going to come to you and try to pitch you on renewable energy as the one resource, but we believe that if you leverage all resources together, you can maximize the value and the life of all of them. So for my friends in the oil and gas industry and customers, for example, in Asia who want decarbonized natural gas, if I can decarbonize the production of that gas, the transport, the LNG terminals, and I can get that gas to Asia with a lower carbon footprint, makes it more attractive. So we don't believe in one thing. We believe in leveraging everything. Markets are changing. Customers are changing. Climate issues, carbon issues. The customers are driving those. And so we are trying to be responsible for that. We live in a very dangerous world, which we have all seen in Ukraine. We see how Russia is now squeezing Europe with regard to energy flows so that they can literally take the largest country in Europe, which is Ukraine, which is not something that we should stand for, but we believe now that we see that energy, we've always known it, is used as a weapon, we need to fight back. We've got more ammo than anybody in the sun and the wind and under our feet in our resources. We also believe that democracies make better energy and that America is a good supplier and a reliable ally, so it's time to step up our production. As of the end of last year, there are over 211 gigawatts of renewable energy in the United States, and I know the type is small, but I'll point you to the light blue is wind, solar coming on very, very strong, energy storage in green at the top. And I won't belabor the energy storage point, but you are going to see a lot of activity in energy storage. Georgia Power, to their credit, is looking at a new technology right now that is called iron oxide. It's a type of battery, very heavy, very cheap, long duration, high capacity. Can't use it for cars because it's so heavy. Can't use it for phones because it's so big, but it stores a lot of power and it's inexpensive. And so, again, Georgia is sort of at the forefront of the newer technologies and the way this market is changing. But keep an eye on energy storage. That's going to be coming on tremendously fast. It was said earlier, again, 90% of reduction in the cost of solar panels, and somebody stole my line about the flat screen TV, but if you go on the archive.org and look at Best Buy from 20 years ago, that flat screen TV was 5, 6, 7 times more. They're basically giving them away today. And it's because solar panels are very similar to semiconductors. You know, we all were amazed when we got a greeting card that had a chip in it that played music, and now we throw them in the trash. Or you go to a conference, and those of us who are old enough to build our own computers, you go buy a memory chip for $300 and put it in your computer. Now you go to a conference, they give you a chip with 8 gigs, 60, you throw, a memory stick, you throw them away. Because solar panels are becoming a commodity, just like memory chips and other semiconductor products. Looking at capacity, I think this has been covered. We know where Georgia is top 7 in solar production and doing very, very well. The share of solar generation, 4.4% of the state's power coming from solar. You look at places, and it was pointed out earlier, this map, darker green, where you have more percentage coming from solar, and you see it, for the most part, ties to the solar resource. But in the Northeast, you've got Vermont, 16% solar, and Massachusetts with 19. They also have very low overall loads, so it's a little bit easier to make a lot of movement. Capacity, again, we've covered. People ask, you know, from our perspective, why is renewable energy important? And I'm going to just say, you know, almost the part of it is, for some people, unfortunately, it's clean. The reality is that on the spectrum, there is something, wherever you reside on the political spectrum, there is something for you in renewable energy. Earlier it was said, you know, that we ought to be growing our own energy, creating our own resource. Solar power created in the state of Georgia, used in the state of Georgia, I mean, that is as homegrown as you can get. The job creation that comes from that, the economic development, the tax revenue for local communities, local schools. We've talked about natural gas prices. Natural gas was at $9 an MCF earlier this year. Renewable energy, because of those long-term contracts, because of the very low price, is a natural hedge against volatility in gas prices, which serves consumers well. Uses no water. Wind and solar, neither one use water, other than someone pointed out, technically to wipe off the solar panels and clean them occasionally. We do use water for that. But water is the second largest use of water in the United States is for power generation. So having a resource that you don't have to use water for is important. Rural communities, bringing economic development to rural communities, this is something that is uniquely capable for renewable energy, low prices. And I'm going to talk a little bit about commercial and industrial demand. But back, and I should have put this earlier, this is a map of the resources that this country has in the way of, at the top, oil and gas resources, the bottom left, the wind resource, and you can see why we as an organization originally, we were set up in the purple part of the country. Bottom right, you're looking at the solar resource of the country, and you see that lighter orange area really extends almost the entire way through Georgia. But it is, the Southeast is tremendously blessed with a natural resource in the way of solar power. And so tapping into that, but recognizing also, and when it comes to oil and gas, Georgia is not a top producer of oil and gas. And so the gas that you use, it's vital to keeping a reliable grid, but it does come from somewhere else. So to the extent that you can be using your own resources, this is an opportunity for you as well. Economic development, also very key. This is a list of companies that have announced in the United States, and actually the list is much longer, but this is a list of companies that have announced power purchase agreements for renewable energy. And I've worked with some of these. The one that stands out to me, two of my favorites, Mars Global, a major pet food manufacturer, also makes candy, M&Ms. They have a wind farm that powers all of their manufacturing facilities in North America. General Motors operates the plant that builds Suburbans. So their largest, most fuel, and I drive one, fuel inefficient, absolutely not. This is not the green vehicle of the future. Their most fuel inefficient vehicles are manufactured using 100% renewable energy. Now, why did they do that? They did that because they got a long-term power purchase agreement for a power price that allowed them to have certainty in their planning for their manufacturing process, that then allowed them to make investments in their manufacturing facilities and in their job creation. So Anheuser-Busch is also on this list. So your beer, your M&Ms, and your Suburban are all guilt-free because they're made with renewable energy. But these are companies, Anheuser-Busch moved to 100% renewable energy for their manufacturing process. So from an economic development perspective, having this resource available in your state to attract manufacturers to your state is going to be vitally important. And I'm going to let Ryan cover, I know we've had some questions around land use, so I'm going to let Ryan, who's led GILSA, cover that.
Hello, my name is Ryan Sanders, the Executive Director of the Georgia Large Scale Solar Association. And so we pulled some numbers together because we understood there to be some concern about solar and how it intersects with the agricultural community. As you can see here, there's roughly 24 million commercial timber acres and 9.6 million agricultural farm acres, combined about 34 million. And solar as a percent, we're looking at, in these numbers, I took a rough swag at how much is currently on the grid now, right around 5 gigawatts, doubled it, and then added a little bit of extra to kind of illustrate the point that even if we double from where we are now, more than double, we're still less than 1% of the overall agricultural farmland in Georgia. But if you look at this, we got it broken down into timber, ag, and then combined. And as you guys are aware, when you drive through, you've seen solar take place on ag land. You also see it in timberland. Most notably in Houston County, there is a very large solar farm along 75. And that has been installed on not a commercial timber farm, but really just a volunteer hardwoods. So in a lot of respects, solar is finding its way to hard to reach ag land. An ag land that might not be ideally suited for agriculture or commercial timberland. So less of an issue than it could be. You see them everywhere, so they appear to be invading the state, but in reality, they're just a small piece of a larger puzzle. And then this illustrates the financial impact. On the left here, we have the rent to landowners. And unlike Green Power EMC, the Georgia Power model, most of those solar farms, especially the utility scale solar farms, are leased from Georgia landowners. And so we took made some assumptions on average lease rate, and the cumulative net benefit to Georgia landowners is approaching $2 billion. And then when you take into account the tax to local governments, and oftentimes utility scale solar has a certain amount of tax incentive from the local community, so when you add that into the mix, you're still approaching about $1 billion in tax to governments.
You might want to use the example of Twiggs County.
Go ahead. We didn't do that project, but
Yeah, so one of our members has a 200 megawatt site in Twiggs County, and that project is half of the tax digest of Twiggs County. And so and from their standpoint, they had a fire station that closed down, and they were able now to reopen that fire station, and the fire insurance rates were off the charts when they had to go to a volunteer fire department in that part of the county. So, that we are seeing that in a number of communities that desperately need investments in their local governments, and that is something that solar does bring to the table.
On this issue, I would just point out, in my experience, I've been doing this for 10 years in dozens of states. And my experience is not that farmers and ranchers or cattlemen want to get out of the business and hand the land off to a solar company, either through a sale or a lease. This is an opportunity, and again, I've been every part of the country, for people who in many cases have been on land for 100 years, who have struggled during times of low commodity prices or in times of drought, but who are looking for an additional predictable long-term revenue stream that will help them stay on the land. There are people who sell, but more often than not, folks are looking for a way to stay on the property and create a revenue stream. And for rural communities, and the examples around the country are many, and I'm happy to share, I won't belabor it now, but for communities that have historically not been funded at a level that they need for the students they have, this is a way to bring new revenue into the community without putting a lot of strain on local infrastructure. So if you move a lot of times they have an unemployment rate that won't support a major manufacturing facility, but what they need is capital in their tax base for the kids they already have, and so solar is a great option there. We did some polling. I'll just say we polled the entire Southeast. The polling, the methodology, used a Republican polling firm out of Missouri to try to make it as highly credible as possible, and it's all on my website. But in Georgia, 76.5% said they support or probably support expanding the use of renewable energy in the state. And we talked about manufacturing. There is a lot of manufacturing coming to Georgia. There's a lot of opportunity to supply this industry. We don't want to buy panels from anyone but America and our allies. There are incentives in the new, and I don't know that any of us can keep the name straight, but the IRA has incentives for domestic content. So yes, they're encouraging investment, that we've got incentives for carbon capture, we've got incentives for all kinds of things, but one of the key incentives in my mind is domestic content. So you, as a developer, you're in a better position to use panels and equipment that come from the United States, and that's exactly the kind of thing we should be encouraging. We do not need to be more in bed with China than we already are. And lastly, well, actually, let me close with that. I'm happy to take any questions and save some time here.
Jeff? Chairman Perkle, you want to start us off?
Yes, sure, thank you. And I appreciate your presentation. I am concerned about what some of these solar farms could do for productive farmland. So as all the farmers in this room know, all land is not equal. It is not all productive. In fact, I've had some land that I've leased for 20 years that please put a solar farm on it. I can't grow peanuts or cotton, and it's not doing me much good. It's just holding the world together. But then there are some productive lands that we've seen not far from here, some highly productive agricultural lands that have gone into, because it's honestly with the high input costs, with the low commodity prices and drought and hurricane, we have seen tough times on the farm. And when you throw $700 an acre, when you throw big numbers at people that are struggling to eat, it's easy, I would think, to get some productive land. One of the concerns I had, the questions I had regarding one of the slides is the $1 billion in municipal tax for property tax for municipalities and local governments. And how much of an increase in the value of the land are you seeing to arrive at that? Because so on my farmland, I'm paying, in rural parts of the state, we actually pay a higher property tax than they do in urban areas because we have the density of the population that we don't, it's more sparsely populated, and so in order to support firefighters and our sheriff and the things that we need for local government, our tax rate is higher than in some other areas. So is this $1 billion, is that an average of 30 or 40% higher than what I'm paying already? Because the lands, it's already held in private lands, you're already paying property tax to locals for it. Is that gain because of the higher valuation because of the panels?
That's a great question. And in fact, our numbers are probably a bit conservative because we did not factor in an aggressive escalation in the property taxes. This is really being driven by ad valorem taxes, the equipment property taxes. And we are seeing this across the entire state. So ACCG is in the room. Initially, when these solar systems first started being installed, we were riding on the existing ag property tax evaluation, right? But tax assessors across the entire state, really the whole country, are getting sharp on this, right? And they're realizing that it's appropriate to move the underlying property valuation up to reflect the transition usage. And there's no there's no uniform way in which it's occurring across the state, but in general, we're seeing ag property taxes, the underlying land, increase to about $6,000 per acre in the valuation.
So as a follow-up, Mr. Chairman, so it's fairly easy to come up with, for our tax assessors, the value of land, because you look at recent sales based on the quality of the land, the slope of the land, the location of the land, and it's fairly easy to come up with a fairly accurate, but is it like the Wild Wild West? How do you evaluate, because it's not going to sell? How are our assessors gauging the value of this?
So that's an interesting question, and it's more probably of an ACC question than it is a developer question, because we don't really see the methodology behind the tax assessors. We're just receiving the bill in the mail. But we are seeing that most counties are falling within a range. If they do adjust the value, the property value up, it's anywhere from $4,500 on the bottom of the range to, in some cases, like $8,000, $9,000. And usually, there's a very uniform process by which this happens, and then usually the landowner is in there appealing. And so we're seeing things kind of levelize at about $6,000 per acre for land that's underlying the solar farm. Did I answer that correctly? If I didn't hit quite the mark, let me know, and I'll try to adjust that.
Okay, that it? Good. So that 60,000 acres number, where did that total solar acres used, where did that number come from?
So we're looking at about 5 acres per megawatt. And if we wanted to do 12 gigawatts of solar, we would need about 60,000 acres. Now, as you heard Georgia Power reference earlier in Green Power MC, we're far below that 12 gigawatts. We're about 5 gigawatts of Georgia Power contracted projects, and the PSC has just recently approved another tranche over the next 10 years that would get us up to 7,500 or so. So we're well below that 12 gigawatt mark, and 7,500 as currently planned will take until 2030. So we try to create a really big number that's outlandishly large to kind of to frame our argument here. And so we just did 12,000 megawatts times 5 acres per megawatt and got that 60,000 total solar acres used. And of note, right now we have about 20,000 acres of contracted solar, under panel as we speak, as we stand here today.
And I know you're the large scale solar association, so that, I guess I'm just trying to get wrapped around that number. At what level do you become a large scale? And you're not a 15 acre, a 20 acre, we got 60 here, is it?
So here in Georgia, the divide's right around, it used to be 3 megawatts, now it's 5 megawatts. So Georgia Power will allow you to grid connect your project to a distribution line if you're 5 megawatts or less. From a transmission perspective, there's 2 groups. There's the small generation interconnection, which is 20 megawatts and less, and then there is anything above 20 megawatts as a large generation interconnection agreement. So there could be 3 tranches in the way you look at it, but here in Georgia, it's mostly 3 megawatt DG and then very large utility scale.
Okay. And then I guess as an association, from a remediation standpoint, cleanup, could you just maybe speak to some of that, or either one of you, like, do you have recommendations? What are other states doing? Just could you speak to it?
Well, I think the most, Georgia Power said it well, their contracts include what we call decommissioning requirements. And all of the utility scale developers will have that. I think one of the things that we can all do immediately tomorrow is, as you have constituents who are talking to developers, and I will say one of the other issues where the concern about land use comes up, and I've seen it in wind, I've seen it in solar, I've seen it in every state we work, that when developers show up in a community and they know that someone is going to build a solar project. I mean, we all may see an opportunity in a certain county and we may all go there and start talking to landowners. Well, the reality is there are only a certain number of contracts going to be made for solar power. The reality is there's only a certain amount of transmission that can move that power. And so while 10 different people may be 10 different projects may be being discussed, only 1 or 2 of those may come to fruition. But it creates alarm in communities because they think when they hear, well, you were talked to and you were talked to and you were talked to, well, we're going to be surrounded by solar farms. Well, the reality is that's not going to happen. But it creates concern. One of the most important things, the members of my organization, the larger utility scale developers will include decommissioning requirements in their contracts. We have, my recommendation for you as you deal with constituents, and we tell people every time you talk to any of these folks, whether it's in renewable energy or anything else, get an attorney to look at that contract. But the message for everyone is make sure that there is a decommissioning requirement and that you understand what that requirement is. What we generally do is grade down to, I think we have 3 feet is often the standard. The exception in terms of remediating the land is if the landowner chooses, we will leave any roads that we've created. And not surprisingly for solar and wind projects, when those projects pull out, and we haven't had a whole lot of projects decommissioned, but when we leave, a lot of folks want to keep those roads because they got access to their property they didn't have previously. But I think, we would be happy to have a conversation with you about how best to communicate this to constituents. But the most important thing is every contract should have it. To my knowledge, every large developer does. But every constituent needs to know that should be a requirement. And the model ordinance, which I am not familiar with, but I'm going to spend some time in, I feel pretty certain the model ordinance has some language about that as well. But we do not want, the renewable energy industry relies on a long-term relationship with the community. We're going to be in your county for 20, 30. If we repower, we could be there 50 to 60 years. We want a really good relationship. We want to be contributors to the community. That's why we're active in contributing to the fire department and other school contributions, because we want the community to look at us positively, because other communities, not only around Georgia, but all over the country, are looking at your experience, and if it is not a good one, they will choose not to do business with us. So it's an important relationship, and it goes both ways. And my contact information, you should all have it, but it's in the PowerPoint. We're available anytime. If you have questions, we'll go anywhere, talk to anyone about this topic.
Any further questions? Well, just to follow up, I guess, one of my concerns is we've put so much solar in such a short period of time. We all say we have a remediation plan, but just to think that in 25, 30 years, all of it's got to be remediated at one time, almost, in a sense. In my mind, that's the way I think about it. It's like, how do you do that? How do you prepare and plan for that?
Yeah, let me speak to the recycling issue. The recycling issue is an interesting one, and I would say it's very similar to the domestic content, where we all want the same thing, which is we want jobs in the United States manufacturing the racking systems and the panels and the inverters, but the industry is beginning to grow as the ecosystem grows, and Georgia is a very small part of a much larger United States solar growth. But as the industry grows, there will be more manufacturing in the U.S. This incentive for domestic content will drive that. But as projects begin to reach the end of their life, there is a tremendous amount of value in these panels. I saw a story recently, I think it was the LA Times, talking about how people are stockpiling panels because the recycling facilities aren't in place yet, but they don't want to throw them away because there's so much valuable metal in those panels, and that they're just waiting for the recycling facilities. As this industry grows, to your point, as we have more projects at about the same time reaching that stage of recycling, that ecosystem of recycling will build up. It's another opportunity for states, frankly, to be in that recycling business. And we see that as a key part. Take those panels, turn them, make them into new products, possibly new panels.
And I was just going to add to that too, that, and you heard Georgia Power say this, it may be that a number of those projects at the end of their PPA term decide to refresh, stay in place, and move forward. Now, again, if you're changing it out, you're going to have to recycle the first group of panels, but at least in that situation, you're not changing the land use, and that's a decision that frankly the landowner will get when that PPA term is up.
Yeah, that is one key point. Just to build on that, I don't want to take more time than we're allotted if we haven't already, but from a local government perspective, and I see this with my school districts, that when a power purchase agreement, if I have a solar project in your county and I have a PPA and I'm selling to Georgia Power, then that power is sold for 20 years, 25, 30 years, whatever. My school district now has a guaranteed stream of revenue tied to that project. I didn't win a widget manufacturer that's going to move to town and 8 years from now pack up and leave. This is a project that's guaranteed. This is revenue that's guaranteed. This is revenue I can bond against for my local schools. There's predictability, and to Brad's point, and to build off Georgia Power, repowering, when you have a site that's graded, it's been in operation,
It's interconnected.
we've got the connection, the lines are there. It's a matter in wind and solar, upgrading the equipment, putting in a turbine that will produce more power, putting in a panel that's more efficient because technologies improve over time, and that site can continue to be operational. So these are, from a community perspective, it is a long-term commitment in that investment.
All right. I don't see any more questions, so
Thank you.
thank y'all, Jeff, Ryan, Brad, appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Next up, we've got Lightstar Farming and Solar. Scott Cole, come on down. And y'all just introduce yourself. I see there's more than a Scott Cole, so I'm sorry.
I'm a new person here. So we're from Lightstar Renewables. I'm Lucy Bullock-Seeger. I'm the Vice President of Strategy, and that means policy and regulatory and also strategic initiatives, which agrivoltaics is. We are a distributed generation community solar developer, so that's less than 5 megawatts. And we are very excited about Georgia. Georgia is a leader, and there's a lot of great conversation today, so especially thanks to EDP and the council for having us and starting these conversations. We think that we have a great opportunity to show what's been going on across the country. We don't need to sacrifice productive farmland in face of solar. Sometimes you do need to retire land and let it rest, and other times we can go forward and do both at the same time and maximize the land use. So, and I changed up a little bit of the, because of the conversation that we've had, so we may skip over some stuff, and a lot of people like to see what does this actually look like. So it's very image heavy, so we'll continue that conversation. So feel free to ask questions as we go. And I did want to note that we are contracting for panels from Germany and Turkey, and we are very cognizant about not doing business with China. I just got an email last week from my VP of engineering who signs our panel contracts, and he's going to be signing all U.S. panel contract by December for 2024. So, and that's the buzz of the industry. It's happening already, and we're really proud to be a part of that too. So, but I wanted to really touch on the farmland loss concern, and I'll kind of just introduce myself too, because this is Ian Ward. He is our agrivoltaic solar consultant. He specializes in the liaison between me, the solar developer, and the farmer. And Ian is a farmer himself, first generation, and he's an NRCS soil conservation planner. He works across our entire portfolio of projects. He is in all 6 markets that we have agrivoltaics in. We're in 11 other markets, but of those, we have ag PV projects in them. So, kind of just went all over that. It's me. I just want to point out these photos here. This is a site in Massachusetts, but it is very old. You can see it's not trackers, it's fixed tilt. This is what overbuilt solar for agrivoltaics looks like. It will work, and it's very exciting, but we'll probably never build something like this ever again. So that's why we're in Georgia, because we think we can do it better here with you all. So, but I did want to level set about the farmland loss in Georgia and the projections through 2040. And this does not include land loss to solar, but it does include high-density development, low-density development, so that's your housing and your strip malls and all of that kind of stuff, which is important for growth, but we can also be mindful about how we do this at the same time. So you have, this is from American Farmland Trust, and this is their documented loss between 2001 and 2016. There's a high conversion threat in Georgia, according to them, and they believe that there can be a better policy response. But I do know that Georgia is very, very good about protecting farmland and its farming families, so there's always more that we can do. But you can see the red around Atlanta, and I think we all know that that's what's happened here. So, but with growth comes great responsibility, correct? So we have, that's a blurry picture. Wow, sorry. But you can see these are the top 10 counties in the nation that's projected for farmland conversion by 2040. And although I am from Columbia, South Carolina, I currently live in Massachusetts, and I am in Norfolk County there, so I'm doing my own work in my own backyard to make sure that we're protecting farmers and farmland as well. So we're all in good company here. So you can see that there's mostly northern counties up here, but a few in South Georgia, which I think is important to point out too. And as said by Georgia Power and many others today, through the IRP by 2025, in the next couple of years, we're supposed to see 2,300 megawatts of solar go in, and by 2040, projected to lose up to 1 million acres and that's just permanent development in general. So it's just something to consider when we're talking about apples to apples and farmland loss. So this is also just kind of the larger picture of how Georgia stacks up against the rest. And so they're number 4 for the projected threats. So what are we going to do about it? So I'm here today, and Ian is here as well, and I'm just the solar person. So we have the farmer here to talk nitty gritty. I know there's farmers in the room too if they have some questions about how this all works. So we want to get to the photos and kind of the examples that we have and what we think we can work. The definition is making sure we're integrating both agriculture and solar production on a single parcel, not just next to each other. We want to maximize both uses. The land is then therefore restricted for agricultural use for the life of the project, often 20 years or more. And any acceptable agriculture and horticultural activity is defined by existing statute. That's often the first question that we get from municipal folks is, well, how do you know what agriculture is? And the states have done a really good job outlining what's acceptable use. So we usually follow that guideline as well. We talked about lease payments, and we also, as a business model, provide a stipend to the farmer on the property for a couple of reasons. A, it's what's good for the farming family, it's steady revenue, but also it's a compliance mechanism. So, we're not just pulling the wool over everybody's eyes that we're just gonna be putting a standard solar array here after a couple of years of trying. This means that we have a contract with the farmer, and they're going to be on the land for that amount of time, and, drought happens and all of that kind of stuff, challenges happens in agriculture, and we understand that, but just making sure that municipalities, particularly that care most about their farmland, feel comfortable that we've got something on the books about it. So, also the question we get is, what kind of crops grow? We've got a lot of great research that has come out over the last 10 years about this, and all of these zones, I think it's Georgia is 6A or 6 to 9A. And so we've got a lot of great examples about what could actually work here. The key thing about agrivoltaic solar is that it can reduce water use by up to 40%, in some cases even more than that, which is really important as we're talking about drought in the years to come, and perhaps you have a farmer that doesn't have access to irrigation rights or anything like that. So we're really excited about this possibility. And I just want to stop at these pictures. That's me. I picked some agrivoltaic raspberries in Colorado last year. Tomatillos, we've got kale, chard. They had a great bumper crop of tomatoes on this array as well. This is called Jack's Solar Garden out of Longmont, Colorado. And it's a single axis tracking array. I think it's almost exactly the same layout as we saw in the Georgia Power presentation. And so I wanted to point out that we can do this at cost. And it's not as expensive as people think it is because we can use off-the-shelf racking today. We may space them out a little bit because we would use more and larger efficient arrays, but all the better reason to have more room to navigate equipment and workers through it. So the top fact that I'd like to point out about this, besides the water use, is that in Arizona they found that tomatoes and peppers fruited 3 times more underneath the array rather than an open field. And I just think that's an opening for an amazing new kind of projects that we've got going. So I want to hand it over to Ian. He works with our development team hand in hand to make sure that the farmers know how to farm these arrays, get them through permitting, and sticks with them through the life of the project if they needed extra support. So his company is contracted to be a resource to those farmers, and if the land may change hands depending on the tenant. So he's going to run through some of our projects that we have.
Hey y'all, Ian Ward, Solar Agricultural Services here with Lightstar, and we had some lunch, so just humor me here. What do you think about when I do this? Old MacDonald had a... Thank you, leave me hanging. This is agrivoltaics, which is basically just crops growing underneath solar panels. It's all about the farm. The land first, the farmer second, solar third. This is the approach to make an ecosystem type project that gets us the renewable energy, that, this is a pun intended, empowers the farmer in more ways than one, and allows for land preservation, farmland specifically preservation. We talked about the American Farmland Trust and what we're losing for farmland. Those pictures that we saw earlier, the travesty of all that soil going into streams, that should not be the case. When you can get farmers that are arguably the best stewards of land to identify those pieces of land that are best for solar, maybe it's the ones that are furthest out, maybe it's the ones that are the best. I would argue we should be putting solar over the most prime farmlands, because to protect that for 30 to 60 years, it means it won't be the last crop. The last crop is houses or development of some other sort. So from that perspective, what can happen with crops? I get asked all the time by farmers, by legislators, by politicians. Well, do crops grow? Isn't there too much shade? Well, with bifacial panels and single-axis trackers, there's actually a whole bunch of sunlight. It's not about shade, it's about photosynthetically active radiation. That's what plants use to photosynthesize. With diffuse light, the studies that UMass is doing, that Colorado State is doing, that UC Davis, Rutgers, all these universities are saying, academically, we want to study this. We think that there's something to this. And with climate, whatever's happening in the climate today, sunlight is more intense. And there are certain crops that are getting scalded. So maybe there's some enhancements to crops, certain crops that these panels have. So what crops can grow? Will they die? First off, what crops can grow? Well, I'll tell you, grass grows almost everywhere. So grass grows. That's grazing for sheep, for cows. You got that Silicon Ranch. I spent the weekend with Will Harris. So you talk with him about what's going to grow under there. He'll tell you a lot. So you got your grass. You got you saw just now out in Colorado, lots of mixed veggies. Mixed vegetables are great. That's direct to consumer product. That's not for everyone. It takes a lot of labor. But maybe a portion of some of these projects could be that. It's not all or nothing. That's what we're talking about. This is that property here, Jack Solar Garden. Cattle. Sheep are easy. Not goats, but sheep. Sheep are easy. They can grow, they can be grazed anywhere. Cows, on the other hand, maybe something different. Those panels, if they're at full tilt, the cows maybe could run into them. But there's Silicon Ranches using those collars that tabletop those panels. There's technology that can be used, right? In New York, at a project that they're looking at growing soy, because it's a dairy farm, they're looking at grazing their smaller calves and heifers, right? As long as the bull's not in there, then they're not worried about mounting and whatnot. So these are farmer-led conversations, and these projects are designed with what the land has historically been used for, what the farmer wants to continue to do, what the next generation. This is a succession planning technique too. We can have all the land in the world. If we don't have farmers that know how to farm it, we're indeed doo-doo. So we've got to figure out how to keep the next generation, make farming sexy again, bring it back, right? Get that next generation excited about using technology, having a source of income, because that stipend is a real deal. The landowner makes some money from land lease. The farmer makes money to farm. Not only are they not paying rent, the tenant farmers too, right? Not paying rent, not paying for the fencing that goes around. Talk to a vegetable producer, find out how many deer are on their property, how many profits are being eaten by the deer. You put a fence around that and keep the deer out, that's a benefit. So these are things that are happening that we're doing in the Northeast that I would implore you to think about doing here. Some more examples: cranberries, blueberries, apples. We're looking at doing apple orchards. The grazing aspect I talked about. The next wave, which is where Georgia could be an example, are some of the commodity crops. There's not a lot of those that are done yet. Right now we're failing fast on some of these other smaller projects. The opportunity is to incorporate some of these things into some of the bigger projects. This is a project in Montgomery, New York. Just an example of off-the-shelf solar being used for vegetable production. Another example. Do you want to continue?
So I think we had a little conversation about kind of best practices that we'd like to see, and these are kind of the ones that I like to peddle, and you'll see that decommissioning the projects is on there because that's absolutely necessary. It's an industry standard now. You ask any responsible developer about decommissioning and they should respond, absolutely, let's talk about it and let's write it down together. So, but I really do, and I wanted to bring it back, and the folks before us did mention it, but I do want to say that I think that the dissemination of the model ordinances, as you have them is super important, because the more towns and municipalities are empowered and know what's coming and how to deal with it, the easier it is for everybody. And these are smaller projects that I'm talking about too. And so, there may be more of them, which has its benefits. You can spread out the wealth in terms of landowners and tenant farmers and things like that. So, these are all things to be considering when wanting to, encourage agrivoltaics, and being clear with municipalities of what that means and what a responsible developer looks like. So we have some more resources. I'm sure everybody has access to the PowerPoints and things like that, but I wanted to go back to the pictures because I think they're the best, kind of illustrating everything. I love that one. Any questions or curiosities from folks?
Chair Corp, excited to see his flowers and his bumblebee under those panels. No questions? No questions? I guess just, I know this is a lot going on in the Northeast, but there's no activity in the southern part of the United States at this current time?
So I wanted to keep it short, but so we have projects in Maryland, New Mexico, that's not the southern part, but it's southeast, hoping to bring stuff to Georgia in short order. And we're also working in Illinois on those more commodity crops. So we're bringing it, and Virginia is absolutely interested in agrivoltaics because they are more land constrained for sure, and they have smaller parcels for family farms. So they're definitely considering it, and we're evaluating that as a new market too.
Yeah, so how do y'all do tillage and prepare for the next crop and all that within these things? Because I don't have a tractor that would go down that road right there.
Go to the first part.
My lawnmower might, but
So this is actually a smaller example of what our arrays would actually look like. This is about 16 feet post to post, and ours is going to be closer to 32 feet post to post. So they would be a lot bigger and wider rows.
This is fairly new in concept, right? So people are innovating now. What we had in Massachusetts was the first state to actually have an incentive, which had some rules to it. So that's what you had to do. You had to raise them to a certain height, 10 feet off the ground, to the tee. You had to have them spaced apart, that it couldn't have any more than 50% sunlight, or 50% shade, I should say, to any square foot. So you had to comply with that in order to get the state incentive. I know they're not huge on incentives here, but that's what happened in Massachusetts. And so these panels, this example here, we've got the Athens Harrow going through. You got a tractor that's 60, 70 horsepower. For commodity crops, big machinery, if we change the mentality, if we looked at this as a land preservation technique, and you can study these projects, by the time you get there, there are going to be more and more projects in the Northeast to look at. There's no reason why we can't say, instead of forcing these onto the smallest amount of land possible, let's say 1,000 acres for a utility scale, why not make it 2,000, spread them out farther? We have a project right now, we're contemplating 120 feet in between the panels. They can have a 60-foot sprayer boom go down. You can grow your commercial potatoes, your commercial corn. So these are all opportunities with a landowner that gets it, with tenant farmers. The more, the better. Maybe you have 3, 4, 5 tenant farmers on the land. So these are all possibilities that we're currently exploring, but it is a new thought.
gotcha. Good deal. All right. Oh, Chairman Dickey.
I think he just answered my question, Mr. Chairman, about the efficiency of them. So those would need to be more land per panel than what we've been seeing earlier today. Is that what you just said? I think the land efficiency, you still got panels, but per acre it would be less to accommodate the farming and the solar.
Right, and that's the dual use aspect of it.
Yeah.
So while you are using more land from one
Yeah.
perspective, you're not losing it. Take 100 acres for an example.
Yeah, I'd just be also curious from the other panelists at some time what the land cost per kilowatt or per project is compared with the other fixed costs for doing the.
So if you do, so what Ian's talking about is to, accommodate for large-scale commodity cropping. You know, what we are thinking of too, and especially in North Georgia where parcels are smaller and there's more smaller producers and things like that, you know, this may be something that they'd be interested in, and then therefore the style and the design would be closer to the New York rendering that we showed earlier. So that actually is a standard solar array with no design adjustments. It's just off the shelf, 7.5 foot tall torque tube, 2 in portrait, which is how we get the efficiencies to have the wider rows too, but it's also a dual benefit for, you need more swing for the larger and longer panels. So it's not really, it's a dirty secret, but I say it to the industry, but it's really not. If you just put your will to it, we know that it'll work, and that's what keeps the costs down. So the cost to a 5 megawatt standard array and versus a standard or 5 megawatt agrivoltaics array, the only cost difference is probably going to be the farmer stipend. So, and perhaps some difference in opinion on the tax assessment value, which I did want to touch on too. You know, when there's going to be intensive agriculture, that's another compliance mechanism to make sure that, you know, developers stay compliant with agricultural production on the land. You know, if you give them tax assessment, yes, it's an incentive technically, but then you also don't run into the issue on increasing the real property taxes underneath it. Then you can say, well, you need to remain in current use assessment. And if you don't, you lose that, and you lose your site plan approval, and you get pulled out of the ground. And that's a major threat for developers and also to the farmer as well. So we want to make sure that they're taken care of.
Chairman Cooper.
This sounds a little superficial, but in Georgia we have a very powerful garden club group who fought, you know, billboards and all, and are very concerned about what our highways look like, and have a lot of angst over some of the ones, these fields that have been put right up against the highways and what they look like. Have you had this growing in between long enough to see a difference in acceptance when it looks like really it's somebody farming and doing something productive and growing something rather than just having a field of the things? Do you know any difference in the acceptance level by the public?
Yes, absolutely. So we have, a few examples. There's recent examples, and then the one that I just showed, this is from Jack Solar Garden. They had, so that was a hayfield before we showed, and it was then turned into vegetable cropping. And the farmer and the owner-operator, his name is Byron, he has noticed an immense amount of positive attention now that he actually doesn't just have, you know, grass growing, and, you know, because you can see the beautiful flowers and they've got berries, and he's turned it into kind of a community event space too, which is very interesting. But, you know, that's one example that's been in production for a long time. Permitting for our projects currently right now, agrivoltaic projects, even with like ordinance changes and bylaw changes, the timeline is much more condensed than a standard array, because people like to see this, and they like to make sure, they like to see the farmers in the fields, and they like to see the pollinator-friendly habitats and things like that. So I would say yes, we do see, especially in the municipal level, greater acceptance that way.
And the other thing is there any limitation on how high you can put the solar panels?
Yes, it depends on whatever municipality rules there are. You know, typically it's about 20 feet. So at full tilt, these absolutely would not reach 20 feet. So, and then we would provide screening for anything below or beyond that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, is that it? All right, well, thank y'all, that's very interesting. Enjoyed
Thank you
hearing
very
about that concept. Next up, we've got the Georgia Public Service Commission. Commissioner Pridemore and Commissioner Shaw, y'all come on down. They're going to kind of tag team here and talk a little bit about some of the solar regulatory environment that they're involved in, and maybe what we need to be looking at, and then also just touch on some natural gas needs that I know we have across our state when we're talking about economic development, and especially in rural parts of our state. So thank y'all for being here today and spending some time with us.
Chairman Powell's off the first round. Good afternoon. Thank you all for the opportunity to be with you all today. My name is Tricia Pridemore, and I'm proud to chair the Georgia Public Service Commission with my very good friend, Commissioner Jason Shaw. We were asked today to talk about natural gas and solar. So I'm going to go ahead and, since we're on the topic of solar, I'm going to fast forward to the solar slides, and then we'll go back and cover natural gas, just because there's a lot happening with solar on our minds right now. There we go. So we're going to back clean up, so to speak. I'm not going to cover a lot of the things that you've already heard discussed. As you all are aware, we are the regulators of Georgia Power. We do not rate regulate Georgia's EMCs or the MEAG cities and their electricity. So a lot of the data that we have is direct Georgia Power. I'm going to correct some things that I've heard today, and also give you all a little bit of a better understanding of what the Commission's role is in solar in the state. So there are primarily two different types of solar, not only in Georgia, but across the country: utility scale and distributed generation. They're primarily known by the difference in size and size of project. A lot of the projects that we see in South Georgia, those are utility scale size projects. Distributed generation connects directly to the distribution system, and those are typically smaller projects, 80 megawatts or under. We just approved an additional 250 kilowatts in this upcoming, or this last 2022 IRP. We also have in this utility scale solar. These projects are greater than 6 megawatts in size, and they're generally located in rural areas just because the cost of real estate is less. But there are some strong considerations in both of these types of solar that we need to think about when we're putting solar in rural land. Two areas I'm not going to go into today because they're very detailed and specific, one of which is retail and instantaneous net metered solar. If you'd like to talk about that, I'm happy to talk to you about that morning, noon, and night. Give me a call. I think everybody on the committee has my number. And then also PURPA qualified facility solar. PURPA solar is the Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act of 1981. The FERC, which is the people that do our jobs at the federal level, they passed this as a rule requiring states to take solar that would come in and developed within your given state. There's a lot of controversy around PURPA QFs. We spend probably some of our most onerous dockets are on PURPA QFs. But the biggest thing that I want for you all to think about too is you talk with people in your district about solar, determine if it is this federal solar, because this federal solar has different requirements when it comes to transmission, interconnectivity, and cost recovery. And that's where we come in, a large part at the commission. So this is a breakdown in totality of a lot of the numbers that you've seen today when we talk about acreage. This came to me direct from Georgia Power. So right now we're at 7,000 megawatts, which is the total Georgia Power solar portfolio, right at 35,000 acres, 54 square miles. It is 0.09% of Georgia, and that is predominantly in rural Georgia, in South Georgia in particular. These are broken down in the two different types: utility scale and DG, distributed generation. And then at the bottom, you'll see some Georgia Power-owned solar facilities. Those Georgia Power-owned solar facilities are on military installations. And when I talk about recycling and waste and recovery and remediation, they're treated very differently. Anything you want to add? Sonny can pop in anytime Cher wants him to. Come on.
Through with the slides?
No, just come on.
No, you just do the slides. You're more technical than me, and then I'll just talk.
Okay. If you'd like to see this by program type, here it is with some pretty colored charts.
Full disclosure, I never saw this because I had some technical problems.
When we talk about environmental remediation, in particular with soil implications in soil composition. This is something that is on the national dialogue right now, and what solar does to the land that's underneath it. So this isn't anything that here in Georgia that we're ready to talk about, or that Georgia Power is ready to talk about, or even that the ag team at the University of Georgia is ready to talk about. But it is part of the national conversation of the impact that solar may or may not have to the land that it sits on. Let's talk specifically, though, about disposal and recycling, and I want to clear up a couple of things that we've talked about today. When it comes to the issues that EPD got into earlier on remediation and litigation and how land management is operated, those are three primary parts of the solar equation that's not really covered in the majority of Georgia Power solar that's managed through PPAs. The Georgia Power-owned facilities are those military bases. There's very little of those right now, of Georgia Power-owned solar across the state. It's primarily done through a third party in a PPA, a power purchase agreement. The federal funds that have been recently made available could change that. So we could see more Georgia Power-owned solar facilities as those federal funds through the IRA and the IIJA make it a little bit more cost-conducive. The solar facilities that are owned by IPPs or third parties through a PPA, those particular facilities may or may not have in their contract anything to do with remediation, land management, or litigation that might arise as a result of the project. That's something that I really believe there's an area of opportunity for us to look at as a state. Considering that as our solar growth has come about, I think that we've probably missed some opportunities to just improve upon the overall process. A big piece of that is also transmission. So if you think about where the load is, the predominant load in the state of Georgia is in and around Atlanta. But if we're building solar in South Georgia, we've got to be able to move that electricity up to Atlanta where that predominant load is. And that's where transmission becomes a major part of the equation. Who pays for it and how we interconnect to these solar facilities? Who should be responsible for that cost? Should it be the Georgia Power ratepayer? Should it be Georgia Power? Or should it be the solar developer? And that's an ongoing debate that we have at the Commission. I also think, too, that it's part of the equation we need to consider when we look at the land acquisition costs. Land acquisition costs are great in South Georgia because the land it's significantly cheaper in Randolph County than it is in Cobb County. And so if we want to be able to move and transmit that power, but also have the land which to be able to construct the solar facilities, we've got to be able to do something to offset those costs. It is putting on the avoided cost procedures for the state and what the avoided cost of solar is. It's not, I believe, a true representation of what the overall avoided cost situation actually is. These are true for both disposal and recycling. When we talk about recycling specific materials in solar, this is a full breakdown that I asked Georgia Power for of all of the different aspects that can be recycled and what about it can. Glass is about 75% of the panel, and it can be recycled. The racking system can be recycled into scrap metal. So there is a great deal of recycle opportunities that we need to explore, and the greater debate there is, should it be explored on the state side, Georgia Power side, or is that an opportunity to create a new market and new businesses for folks to come in and do some work? There's more information on solar recycling at the Energy Information Administration link that I put on the site, or put on the link. I believe that Jeff Clark mentioned a little bit about California, what California's going through. They went long and hard on rooftop solar and any type of solar. Both utility scale and distributed generation. And the results of that is that they have now warehouses full of solar panels. What looks like one person's problem could be another person's opportunity. They, of course, want to be able to recycle it, but a big piece of that, though, is that the California landfill standards will not allow them to put those panels in a landfill. So these are the types of considerations that we need to look at. I encourage you very strongly to check out the article at latimes.com, which talks about what's happening in California. They're the first to tackle it because they have so much more of it than the rest of us. So with that, got anything you want to add on solar?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank y'all for taking some time, and we'll try to be as brief as possible because I know y'all are as tired as I am probably. But in terms of solar, I just want to kind of scale it down. I mean, whether you like it or you don't like it, it's here. And I think we've tried to do a good job of trying to do it in a modest way as far as the growth, and it seems to be working, but we've always been concerned about some of these same challenges that have been referenced today. But I'll be honest, one of the challenges that we really haven't thought as much about is the presentation we heard from EPD today was an eye-opener for me, I can tell you. Because those were some of the things that just don't come to us, they come to them. And I've worked closely with EPD on the biomass side with the definition of biomass and things, but it sounds like that's something that we need to be working with them on more as well. But the problem, I mean, for me as a rural Georgian who sat right here, one of the highlights of my legislative time was this council, and to see the benefits that's come for rural Georgia since the years when the Rural Development Council was first implemented is something that we can all be proud of, and it's because of y'all. And but the benefits for rural communities that's been mentioned, I mean, I've seen it. I mean, but it's such a mixed bag. You got some folks coming to you saying, I'm tired of seeing these solar farms. But then you got the neighbor down the road who's saying, well, I kind of like that check I'm getting every month, you know? So it is, and that's the reality. But the biggest thing we've been concerned about on solar is, I'm not even going to get into it, but we call it the duck curve. It has to do with reliability issues. Wilson could talk all day about it. I'm not a quick learner, so they had to school me. But it has to do with reliability. If you get too much intermittent resources on your grid, you're going to have problems. From an operational standpoint, one of the biggest eye-openers I've had is being able to go to the Southern Company headquarters in Birmingham, where they do all the planning and the resource planning, to see where you've got that many people, all their job is doing is watching the weather all over the Southern Company network to see that there's a lot of operational challenges that come with solar. And so it's not perfect. It's not base load power. That nuclear plant at Plant Vogtle is probably the best cousin that solar could have, because that's the base load power that's also clean. But the last thing we want to be known about in Georgia is a clean energy state that has caused our rivers to become dirty. And after what I've seen today from the EPD presentation, that is obviously something to be concerned about. But long story short, solar, the biggest thing I can tell you about solar, and we don't regulate, like it said, we regulate the investor-owned utilities. So our friends at the EMCs, who are dear friends, and we work closely on many things, they can tell you the reason they're investing in renewable energy and solar is because if you're selling something like they are, let's face it, they're in the business of selling electricity. And they're not going to sell electricity unless they've got a product that their customer wants. And that's what all these companies that are moving to Georgia are. They're not asking for it, they're demanding it. And some of these companies that are locating in Georgia, I'll use Microsoft as an example. They're building 3 more data centers in Metro as we speak, not counting another corporate complex. Just the data centers, we think, could be as high as 500 megawatts of load of renewable energy. That's just one customer, y'all. That's 2,000 more acres of solar, to put it in perspective. So that's what we're dealing with. We can sit here and say we don't want it, but at the same time, we don't want to put a sign on the door that says we're not open for business either, right? So it's a complex issue, and it's going to take us all working together to fix it. But as far as solar, you know, do you want us to take questions now on that before we move into gas real quick? Or?
Yeah, why don't we see if we got some questions here from members. Anybody any questions on the solar? Vice Chair Corbett.
On the recycling, I can see this being the way the cost is coming down on the production of new ones. It's going to be like a computer. Nobody's going to recycle it. He's going to throw it away and go get new ones. Unless we put some sort of incentive to make them recycle.
Many states are looking at solar panel recycling incentives right now because they're trying to speed along the process of capitalism, of getting those businesses that are interested in doing it. We do have a great deal of growth right now in battery recycling because, as we all have learned over the past year, that Georgia's got to be the #1 state for electric vehicles in the country now. And so there is an opportunity there, and I think that could be something that the legislature wanted to look at.
I got kind of along the same lines. So I know one of the recycling and cleanup slides you had, we said that they had to apply to local laws or state laws. We really don't have any.
We don't have
So they're in compliance, basically. So if you have a remediation plan and there's no plan, there's no law or guidelines with that, you do have one and you are in compliance. Is that, am I understanding that correct?
That's my understanding as well, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
One thing that I would add to the whole deal with protecting the landowners and the whole issue with disposal, in the presentations earlier, they've talked about the obligations that are in these contracts. We've seen the model ordinance that was put out by UGA, Georgia Tech, and Emory. That thing's 85 pages, y'all. Most of the counties like where I came from that don't have a traffic light aren't going to adopt an 85-page model. But what we've done is when Chairman England referenced Jay Powell, when my first week on the commission, he called me up and said, I want to talk to you. Let's start talking about solar decommissioning. I ain't been there long enough to even know what they look like yet, hardly, but we've talked a lot about it. And what I've learned, probably more in the last 6 months than the whole time, is what other states are doing when we go to these neighborhood meetings and so forth. And what it has become, I think, a popular thing to do is bonding of these projects. Now, when I first started talking to developers about there, they're like, no. But if you go that route, what you've got to do is the 30-year carry cost on a bond can be very substantial if you set that requirement so high that it's not doable. But if you calculate the recyclable value of all these metal components and everything to do with these panels, then you can get that carrying cost down quite a bit. So I say that just common sense, you calculate that value of the recyclable value in that, but then you bond those projects. That just seems to be something that's very popular. And I'll tell you, that idea, I learned more about it from talking to one of these QF developers that Hamlin represents than anybody. And the QF providers are not necessarily real high on us right now, but but anyway, they do have a lot to offer, even though they did hire Jeff Hamlin.
If there are no other questions on solar, let me put a fine point on it just to say your constituents are our constituents too. I took a picture of this sign in Pelham on Saturday, and I recognize that we have counties that are saying enough is enough. And so reach out to us, talk with us. We want to do what's in the best interest as regulators. Our goal is to uplift the entire state of Georgia, keep us the #1 state in which to do business, keep unemployment low, and make sure that we have energy security, not only now, but in the future. That comes through diversification of fleet, that comes through low cost, that comes from us doing everything we can to get Georgia Power to stretch every nickel. And so I just want you all to know that your constituents are ours too. Reach out to us, talk to us. There's got to be ways around this. I want for your landowners in South Georgia to also get more than they're getting right now for their real estate.
Let me add one quick thing. One thing I failed to mention when is I saw Bill Toomey from ACCG here earlier. He may have had to slip out, but Bill Toomey was the county manager right here in Sumter County when a 5,000-acre solar project was coming in. They had no ordinances. So Bill went to work on that. Now he's working with ACCG. Bill is a great resource for your local governments back home to talk to about this issue. And we can sit here all day and we all know that sometimes local ordinances is like a smorgasbord. They're just all varied. The 85-page ordinance that was mentioned, our regional commission based out of Valdosta has developed a much more simplified version of a model ordinance that their counties can adopt. So at this stage in the game of renewable development, every county in this state needs to have some form of model ordinance, and that's what Jay Powell wanted to see.
All right, let's talk about natural gas expansion. When we're talking about natural gas in this context, we're talking about it for heating only. We're not talking about the 50% of our electrification that's currently coming from natural gas that we're using at peaks. So for heating purposes, our heating partner in this and the regulated utility that looks after this for us is Atlanta Gas Light. They have, as part of the network, in addition to that, 18 gas marketers. If you ever have a question about gas, the price of gas, or how to best serve one of your constituents with gas, call us. The Georgia Public Service Commission produces every single month the monthly gas scorecard to help your constituents and ours get the lowest possible cost for natural gas. We have a great deal of requests for natural gas expansion, particularly in South Georgia where we need it, in my opinion, we need it the most, wouldn't you say?
I agree.
Okay. Let's talk about the Universal Service Fund. The Universal Service Fund and the Econ 1 tariff are two dynamic ways that we have to be able to bring jobs and economic growth to South Georgia. The USF was created for AGL as part of the Natural Gas Deregulation Act of 1998. I believe Chairman Powell remembers that. Come on now. Maybe not. USF can be used for natural gas expansion within the AGL certified territory. If you have a municipal gas provider, this would not apply to them. We administer the USF and we approve the distributions. We've done 559 USF projects. They have been approved by the Georgia Public Service Commission since the year 2000. It's a total of close to $172 million that's directly fed economic development. 64 Georgia counties have seen an impact from the USF to date. In the last 3 years, here are the major USF projects that we've approved. Each and every one of those, and Jason, you can pop in any time on some of these because we've worked on these together. Transmission line upgrade for Wheeler County is the largest that you see there. That has really provided a line extension that we've seen industrial growth and small growth manufacturing all along where that main line was drawn from. Oh, was it Lawrence County, Billy? Is that where it started? Or was it before Lawrence? It was Wheeler, but we went to Wheeler. Where did we start? It was Lawrence. Alamo, okay. The Alamo Tap Station. I'm cheating. I've got Billy with the Economic Development Team with AGL here. So you see time and time again, we've used this fund to be able to spur economic growth, not in Atlanta, but throughout rural Georgia. The USF project approval process, I'm not going to bore you with all the details except to say that a list gets prepared by AGL, comes to the 5 commissioners, we review it, we spend a lot of time talking with each of the project owners. We want to make sure that it applies to all the rules of the USF and how the statute was written. We also do a lot of work to make sure that we're not overdeveloping some areas. Again, we are trying to stretch every dollar that's in that USF. Any project that you have and you'd like to apply, you've got a constituent, you've got an economic development growth. We work a lot with local development authorities. See Billy Horn about that. They take the applications and then they process them, do the scope of work and the cost analysis, and then they bring it to us. The mandatory filing requirements, Billy can go through those with you, or I can if you've got an individual project request. But again, they're there to provide a solid financial and technical analysis of each project. This money does not come from y'all. It comes through a variety of funding sources that are basically incentives put into the way that our deregulated market gas structure works. Interruptible revenue, demand-side requirements, incentive charges, supplier refunds. As each of these marketers are buying natural gas on the open market, there are often times where they're getting a better deal, and that a portion of those funds goes into the USF. Marketer deposits and asset management. We also have, in addition to that, Econ 1, and that's a set-aside tariff that we can use for an economic development project that may not qualify for USF. In other words, we may not have enough money in the fund to cover it. But an Econ 1 tariff project, we've done some really good things across the state over the last couple of years. One that comes to mind immediately is the LanzaJet project that we did for renewable jet fuel in Middle Georgia. So there's a lot happening with Econ 1, and we can talk to you about the 2 options. Amy put up, with the help of AGL, we had them do a map for us of all the USF and Econ 1 projects across rural Georgia. Take a look at it. We'll leave it here so that you can see it. You can see the amount of investment per project, and that's, I believe, since the life of the USF fund and since Econ 1. So we're trying to do everything we can without a tax increase or without coming to the legislature seeking additional funds to grow out natural gas for heating across the rest of the state. This is the way that we've done it to date. We're always open to ideas. I'm proud that Georgia continues to be a state that cherishes natural gas, not only for electrification purposes, but also for heating purposes.
And the main reason we wanted to touch on natural gas today is because, in my opinion, when Sam and I were talking just about 3 weeks ago and talking about the presentation and the solar side, I said, Sam, one of the biggest issues, in my opinion, that we're facing from the standpoint of the Public Service Commission in rural Georgia is the lack of natural gas capacity and also the lack of funding. The USF is great, but just to put it in perspective, I mean, we probably got a couple $100 million of requests out there from various communities right now if you added them up. We had a pretty good bit of money in the USF this year compared to last year. We had $21 million total, okay? John Corbett represents Brantley County now. Brantley County has no natural gas. That's a rural community that is sitting in an ideal location from the standpoint of producing wood pellets from their proximity to the port in Brunswick, right, Andres? No natural gas. If they had natural gas there, there's no telling what it would mean. It would. When we started working on Brantley, it was a $30 million cost, according to AGL and the engineering, whether you came in from Glenn County or Ware County. That cost is already, you can add 30% in the last 18 months. So and now it's $40 million. But then you got, there's projects like that all over, and the price tags are enormous. But the potential is also enormous from the standpoint, and if you look at the success of what y'all have done with broadband, I'm just putting it out there that there's also a need on the natural gas side, whether it's AGL, whether it's Liberty Gas that's here also, they're in Hall County and Muskogee County, or whether it's one of the great municipal providers out there. There's a need, and the USF is just not going to cut it. And the Econ One tariff is the other tool we have, but it's not fair for us to put that in the rate base and make all AGL customers pay for it just if it's one customer. So we're just throwing that out there, and yes, we are asking for help.
Good deal.
Let it be real clear that Commissioner Shaw is asking for help. With that, do we have any questions about natural gas?
Questions? Chairman Corbett probably won't ask this, but did you say you had $21 million in the USF and
Currently.
this year, and he has a project that's $40 million?
40.
So how many
Yes.
other projects are like that
There's 9 total projects on the project list right now.
in around that 200 million?
No.
I haven't calculated. I mean, it's got to be that much. 'Cause, I mean, we've got some communities where the cost is as high as $50 million. For instance, anytime if a community is fortunate enough, and because of y'all's actions and Governor Kemp, there's been so much activity around rural Georgia the last few years, and there's been a bunch of big projects landed. But when some of these big industrial locations build, they suck up all the capacity for that whole region. So when you're dealing with gas, sometimes you can't just fix a location in one area without it has to be a regional project. And sometimes even if it's just a pressure upgrade, we've done some of those where you can do $3 million just in a pressure upgrade sometimes, because you got to keep these systems safe, number one.
Questions? Man, y'all must have done a phenomenal job on your presentation there.
I think it's just late today.
Yeah, everybody's ready to go home. No, thank y'all for that information.
Thank you.
Yep. It's, that's definitely something we need to continue to look at and talk about. Next up, we've got Georgia Department of Transportation, Mark Smith. Come on down. Mark's going to just touch on some electric vehicle charging station stuff. I think there's been a study committee meeting on that already in recent days or weeks. And I think there's one tomorrow, Vice Chairman Corbett said. So, floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Try and get us out of here. I've had an interesting 24. So got the call to come down this morning to represent Janine Miller. So I'll set up the presentation as where we are in the state currently, where we will be and where we are headed as regards to the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. Where we are, I think this started as an economic driver here in the state, as we know that Georgia is becoming, Georgia in the Southeast is becoming a hub for EV manufacturers and drivers. So Governor Kemp launched August of 2021 AMEA, the Electric Mobility and Innovation Alliance, which was led by the Georgia Department of Economic Development to bring together all of the industries from charging to electric utility, fleet, private and public sector to study where we are and what direction we can go as relates to electric vehicles in the state. This here just shows some of that economic development across the state of Georgia from 2018 to present, and more opportunities are coming. November 2021, the bipartisan infrastructure law was signed and established the NEVI formula program. Georgia Department of Transportation, as well as all other DOTs, received guidance from the federal government in February of 22, and we all had to turn around and submit a federal compliant plan by August 1st of this year. And as you can see, we received our approval September 14th. We were one of 35 states to receive approvals in the first round 2 weeks before they were due to send out approval of plans. Where we are now with this, before I get into the overview of the plan that we submitted, which we call the plan to plan, is continuing our stakeholder engagement and public outreach to receive input from those that are drivers, those that are the manufacturers of batteries, EV charging equipment, and utility companies as we move into the deployment phase that we hope to start beginning sometime in the middle of fiscal year 23. So the purpose of this program from USDOT and USDOE is to create a nationwide network of 500,000 EV chargers by 2030. That is important to note because in the first year of this program, or the first phase of this, the federal government says that they will not certify a state as fully built out until we have built out our existing alternative fuel corridors, and that is along the interstates. So to keep in mind that the goal of the federal program is to build out the national network. So our priority is first focusing on the interstate, and then also to ensure a convenient, reliable, and affordable charging experience for all users in the state of Georgia and those that drive through the state. Georgia was apportioned approximately $135 million to spend over 5 years. This is, of course, a max of 80% federal share, and we are looking to get the other 20% from the private sector, and I'll explain what that looks like once we get over to our goals. Key elements of the plan and considerations in the work that's been required by us is, again, stakeholder engagement, compliance with Equity and Justice 40, and what that means is working to make sure that 40% of the benefits are seen in disadvantaged communities. Here, and a priority at GDOT and a priority of the governors is putting a lot of that focus on rural Georgia as some of those disadvantaged communities, and as well as workforce development, because this is such a new industry. So we have been working with technical colleges, state schools, and some of the other training companies that are looking to come here and train the people to install operate, and maintain the chargers across the state. For the program requirements, what it means to be fully built out is that we are required to have a minimum of 4 150 kilowatt DC fast chargers, and these sites have to be every 50 miles down the interstate and no more than 1 mile off of the exit. What 4 150 kilowatt kilowatt chargers look like is, in a DC fast charger, is looking at when you pull up to charge your vehicle, hopefully getting from 20 to 80% within 15 to 30 minutes. Just to give you a picture of what that kind of looks like. Right now we have 12 NEVI compliant stations that are fully built out across the state. And in the first 2 years of the funding, we should be able to fully build out our 30 to 35 gaps that we currently have, and that includes upgrading existing sites or completely new sites. And we think that should be about half of the total amount that is apportioned to us before we look elsewhere to build out outside of our existing AFCs. Important to note that we are working with evolving guidance. As I mentioned, original guidance was given to us in February of this year. We received notice for proposed rulemaking. We sent comments, so we have yet to receive final rules or regulations. So we anticipate that we will be continuously updating this plan and deployment based off of evolving guidance and final rulemaking that is to be determined. Some of the big components of that are going to be Buy America, cybersecurity, and data reporting requirements. Our vision of our plan, it's here highlighted in 5 components. Our overall vision is to be a niche investor here. GDOT recognizes that, with this, the funding that we are receiving, we are not going to solve our charging problem. It is only going to fix maybe about 10% that is out there. And ultimately, our goal is to go where the private sector is not going to go naturally. And again, that is where our focus is on building and expanding these opportunities through rural Georgia. So the first goal here is to be compliant, of course, with federal requirements. 2, to be customer driven. So we want to go where the drivers prefer to charge, regardless of whether private sector investment can fully fund it. 3rd is economic development. We believe that these sites should be placed to optimize economic development opportunities from and for electric vehicles, but also for the surrounding areas where they are. So when a driver is coming through the state and they're driving down I-16, or they're going to Florida where they can stop anywhere to charge up and they're there for 30 minutes at a time, that hopefully this generates some economic development opportunities across the state. 4th, our goal is for private sector ownership and operation. GDOT does not want our stickers on these chargers. We want the private sector to completely install, operate, and maintain these. Again, we envision ourselves as a niche investor and letting the private sector do what they know and how they know best. And lastly, our goal is to make sure that these sites are developed to ensure that they are reliable and sustainable over the 5 years required program funding, but also after the 5 years that they are required. This gives us a quick overview of the customer-driven deployment types to kind of tell you, to help show you exactly what this hopes to accomplish. You'll see the level 2 chargers, which are probably going to be much more beneficial across the entire state overall. We are again hoping to get some of that from the final rulemaking. A lot of that are the short local trips, your long trips, overnight from the state. But the DC fast chargers, of course, are very beneficial for those that have very long trips. And again, keeping in mind a national network as the primary goal of the federal government. The first phase here of deployment is, as I mentioned, building our alternative fuel corridors. We went and evaluated all our corridors, submitted 2 new corridors to federal highways, and we received those designations in May. And this is kind of an overview of what we did to evaluate the corridors. The 2 corridors that we did nominate were US 82 and US 441. And there will be more that can come. Again, one of the big priorities here, as you see from US 82, was we wanted to make sure that we took care of our hurricane evacuation routes. And then, of course, on 441, we'll see that there's a lot of development that is happening. We will continue to nominate additional corridors as a call for some of more nominations. And so with the 2 that we nominated, that adds 328 miles. Most of that expansion is in rural areas. And again, 441 from Albany to Cornelia and 82, Dublin to Cornelia, and 82 from Brunswick to Albany. Here at 441, kind of shows you why this was selected for this first phase of designation and deployment. We see some of the benefits here are the strong site hosts with the 5 major economic clusters. This is close to where Rivian is going, SK Innovation, major tourism along this route, and relatively high EV share of new vehicles in this region. And then 82, again, the big priority for us here was the GEMA evacuation route, and as it serves southeast Georgia, where there was no corridor or any direct connection to some of the other corridors at all. And these economic clusters here, I forgot to mention the first one, we kind of put in there that it has shopping centers, the grocery stores, hotels, gas stations, and rest stops. Our next steps, as I said, is we are now moving into the phase of the deployment. What will it look like to set up these procurement contracts? Where will these locations be? Who will operate them? And that is stuff that we are that we are actively doing right now with the consultants that we do have on board. We are monitoring the work of the General Assembly's Joint Study Committee to see if that will inform some of our deployment plan. And again, further engagement with the general public, continued analysis of the location options based on customer-driven factors, federal requirements, and state law. And then also reviewing and complying with further federal guidance that we expect from USDOT and USDOE. And I will end there and take questions, as I know I probably zoomed through that, but there will be more information that you can find on our website, dot.georgia.gov/NEVI.
All right, anybody have any questions?
We were just sitting here, and how easily are these stations vandalized? And how do you protect them? And is this a problem where they have stations now? I don't drive an electric car and I don't plan to, so.
Yeah. We have seen some stories of some vandalizations or some that had destroyed some of the equipment. One of the requirements from the federal government is for us to consider the security risk and security that is there. And so when the site hosts actually bid on try to bid on having these on their sites, that is something that they also have to provide to us as how they will secure these. And so again, that is going to be something that we look at those that compete to have these to check that box for us.
Good deal. All right, Mark, I don't see any other questions. If anybody wants to talk more about EV, they can go to Fort Valley tomorrow to the meeting over there. Hang out. Thank you for that update. Appreciate what y'all do at GDOT.
Thank you.
Next up, we've got Georgia Forestry Association. Andreas Villegas is here with us. Everybody knows Andreas. They've actually got a ballot question on a referendum on the ballot that we passed this past session, but they've got some other stuff that they've been working on, and we just wanted to get an update on that and hopefully be able to maybe move forward on some of that and as a recommendation from this council. So, Andreas?
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to be here this morning. We're going to go ahead and play this video and go ahead and get that. Some of you have seen this already, but this is for referendum A. All right. Well, thank you so much. I guess more than anything, we wanted to say thank you. As you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, this all started here, and quite, so the RDC for us, you have been essential. A lot of the things that sometimes it's hard for us to get on the radar when it's funneled through this committee. All the work that you've done over the past several years has accelerated so many things that would have taken us probably twice as long to be able to get onto the radar of the Capitol. So thank you so much, number one. I want to thank as well as our chairman at the, Chairman Watson, obviously, but also Chairman Dickey and Chairman Walker as well, who made these bills move through the session. And, you know, this was one of two bills that required 2/3 votes, both carried actually by you, Chairman Watson. The other one, 686, the House passed twice. That was one to reduce the severance tax value from 100% of the value of timber down to 40% like other real property. You passed it twice. Thank you so much. You'll get a chance to pass it again this coming session, hopefully, if the chairman chooses to carry it again for us. That one got hung up in the components that we see there happening on Sine Die in the Senate, unfortunately. Nothing wrong with the bill, just ran out of time. One thing I did want to mention too as well is a couple other things. On referendum A, what are the questions I'm getting from legislators around the state that are calling up and saying, hey, I'm getting this question from the media, from wherever it may be. We've reached out to 191 media outlets across the state with this video, with other assets, and so we're engaging them directly, op-eds, all those kind of things. But legislators are asking me, Andres, who does this help? So there's about 1,200 companies, like the ones you saw in that video there, that employ between 10 and 30 people in our sector, all across the state of Georgia. So about those 1,200 small forestry businesses is who this primarily helps. And why does it matter? Those businesses are the ones that are responsible for Georgia planting between 200 and 300 million trees a year. And so that's one of the things that makes us number one. We plant more trees than any other state in the nation, and probably more than most countries around the world. So we're a powerhouse in that space, and of course that's what drives, that's the foundation for driving our forest economy in the state of Georgia. So along those lines, I've left with some of you some spiral-bound notebooks that show, as we were telling the story, we wanted to show, well, why is this relevant in different parts of the state? So we went through the regional economic commissions, and so you can see here what that looks like. So we wanted to be able to capture, obviously, for the entire state. You can see here what it looks like for the River Valley region, about 2.2 million acres, the economic impact of $805 million, the number of jobs, just slightly under 2,000 jobs in this region, and $144 million in wages and salaries just in this region. So we've done that for a couple of different areas. You can get that for your state. Feel free to reach out to me. We can send it to you digitally too as well. Here you can see what it's like in the south kind of central region of the state at 3.2 million acres and over $2 billion of economic impact. We even did it for Atlanta. And you don't think about always Atlanta being a powerhouse, but remember, Georgia Pacific, Westrock, Graphic Packaging all have their global headquarters there. Companies that employ almost 13,000 employees and pay $6.7 billion in payroll every year. Have an impact in $6.7 billion and have a payroll of $1.2 billion. We may have a bigger impact in Atlanta than any other part of the state in some respects, right? So that's the beauty of forestry. Yeah, you see it when you're driving down the highway or flying over the state, and you might see it when you might think about that, but it's also right in the heart of downtown Atlanta in so many different ways. There's not a community in the state that's not impacted by it. So with that, we ask you to please encourage your constituents and folks around the state that you talk to vote yes on referendum A. Thank you for your support. We look forward to charging into next session too as well with some additional items that will help the forestry community. I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Andres?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Well, there you go. That's how it works.
Good deal.
All right.
Good deal. Well, thank you, Andreas.
Yes,
and I guess they don't build any skidders in China because they hadn't gotten any cheaper. But anyway, thank you for what you do and what your association does, and look forward to working with you guys going forward on that next piece of legislation. So thank you. Next up, we've got an update on broadband. As y'all know, this was a big issue of ours from way back from the very beginning with Chairman England and Chairman Powell and Speaker. And so you heard a little bit from EMC earlier, so we're going to hear from some of the other folks involved in that. But we'll start with GTA to kick it off. So the floor is yours, Jessica.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the council for having us to do a brief update of what the progress that the state has made over the last year related to broadband. As y'all know, GTA has responsibilities in the state for broadband, mainly providing strategic planning and technical assistance, along with DCA, with the two agencies really working together to form our state broadband office. And so with GTA's responsibilities, over the last year and a half, we've been providing assistance to the Office of Planning and Budget to implement the various broadband grants that have been available. And as y'all may recall, Governor Kemp earlier this year in February announced over $400 million in awards from State Fiscal Recovery Fund, money within ARPA, for last mile broadband projects. Those projects are currently underway and are still slated to reach roughly about 180,000 locations in the state of Georgia, with varying timelines, but they have to be done by the end of 2026, but many of those projects are going to be done much sooner than that. Additionally, what I'm mainly going to discuss today is the project that we are currently working on, which is another set of resources for connectivity within ARPA called the Capital Projects Fund. The state of Georgia is receiving just shy of $260 million for the Capital Projects Fund, and the state is planning to use a vast majority of that, again, for last mile broadband deployments. Unlike for state fiscal recovery funds, the state actually has to submit our grant plan and program plan to United States Treasury for approval for capital projects. That has been submitted, and so we're waiting final approval from Treasury, but we are confident that we are in the final stages of that and are very hopeful that our plan will be approved soon. With that, we can use up to 5% of that fund for administration. However, based on all of our budgeting, it looks like we're going to use a good bit less than that. However, in our plan that was submitted to Treasury, there are three options to really submit for different types of grant plans to use this money. The first one, 1A, is broadband infrastructure, and that's what we have put $250 million of the almost $260 million in for broadband infrastructure. And the second one, in addition to obviously using a portion of that funding for program administration, is for digital connectivity, that the state is still looking to see what we'll use that funding for, whether that's potentially a device program or that also could be shifted over to do additional infrastructure projects depending on the outcome of the grant project. And so with that, currently, the application window is open with the Office of Planning and Budget for the Capital Projects Fund. This grant program was run a little bit differently and structured a little bit differently than the State Fiscal Recovery Fund program. We have a fantastic state broadband map that has wonderful data within it. And so the state decided to structure this grant program for Capital Projects Fund based on the mapping and the data within it. And so what the state did, I believe it's on my next slide, is we initially looked at all of the data within the state broadband map. It's refreshed every year on July 1st, so we just went through a refresh. And so we looked at the data, and we wanted this to be a very data-driven program. And so initially what we did is looked at any county that had more than 2,500 unserved locations based on our state mapping effort, or any county that was more than 20% unserved. That left us with 44 counties that made the preliminary eligibility list for the Capital Projects Grant Program. However, what we did, like we did with State Fiscal Recovery Fund and like we will with our future programs, we ran a challenge process. We called it service verification. But essentially that gives internet service providers the opportunity to provide updated information to the state, because as we know, everybody is constantly building, and the second that we put our map up, obviously that there ultimately changes. And so what that process does, it allows for the internet service providers to let us know where they have built or where they're actively building to since they last reported data to the map, so that we can make sure that this funding is targeting those locations that are unserved but also unfunded. And so, and also just to step back a moment, when we're looking at the 2,500 or 20% unserved metric for our counties, what the state did is we removed all funding commitments. And so we looked at our mapping data, and then we removed any location that has an enforceable funding commitment from either the state or the federal government, meaning that the State Fiscal Recovery Fund grants that the governor awarded earlier this year, those locations were removed, along with other federal funding commitments to make sure that we're not duplicating resources and are truly getting this funding to the unserved, unfunded within our state. Following service verification, we ended up having 33 eligible project areas, and the state is currently following this grant timeline. Applications are due by 5 p.m. this Friday. And then at that point, those will be scored and then reviewed and then sent to the governor for final approval. We are still on the timeline of meeting this timeline to hopefully make award announcements by the end of the year, assuming that the state has approval from Treasury. We do expect that we should receive that soon. However, if there is some delay in Treasury approving our plan, that's really the only thing that we are putting as a caveat that could potentially change this timeline that we're working off of. The other big thing that I really wanted to discuss was the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the infrastructure bill. So each state gets a minimum of $100 million. However, based on their allotments, which we don't know our allotment yet, because states will find out their allotment based on a new location level map that the FCC, based on the legislation, is required to stand up. Essentially, the FCC is required to create a national version of what we already have in Georgia. They're currently going through that process right now, and the new map is expected early next year. Based on what we're hearing from NTIA, who ultimately be overseeing this program at the federal level, they're a subsidiary of the Department of Commerce. They're probably going to be going based on the second iteration of the FCC's map to make final award determinations. And that will be determining what percentage of funding the state of Georgia will get, along with other states, with a total fund of that being $42.5 billion. So with $42.5 billion being dispersed amongst the states, we have heard kind of projections of what the state might receive, but those are still projections at this point, and so there's a lot of variables that could go into what that number might look like, but we're certainly hoping that early next year we'll be able to share the firm number that the state will be receiving for the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs funding. We do expect it to be quite significant. Within that, within the IIJA, there's really kind of two paths and two kind of areas of focus for the state that we have applied for. We and all other states have applied for NTIA's Digital Equity Planning Grant. That's roughly just over $1.4 million in planning funds for the state to do a very robust community engagement effort, along with creating the state's digital equity plan that will be due to NTIA within a year of receiving this funding. As of right now, the state of Georgia has not received this funding, but we do believe that it's coming very soon. Same thing for, we call it the BEAD program, but it stands for Broadband Equity Access and Deployment, which is really the significant funding that will be for broadband infrastructure projects within the IIJA. The state has applied for our planning funds for that. You can apply for a maximum of $5 million to be used over a 5-year period. Same with digital equity. We are expecting to receive that funding very soon, but we have not received it at this date. With the digital equity planning funds, that money is a little bit more flexible. A lot of states are using that to stand up broadband offices. Obviously, Georgia is in a better position with the infrastructure that's already in place. A lot of states are using that to stand up location-level broadband maps. Again, obviously, the state of Georgia is certainly ahead in that, based on your work with Senate Bill 2 in 2018. Obviously, Georgia's in a much better position than a lot of other states that are scrambling to very quickly create their own maps. And so the deliverables from these are, again, a year from the date of receiving the funding, we will have to produce the state's digital equity plan. And then following that, there will be a capacity grant following that program. And then with the broadband access and deployment plan, what we have to do is within 270 days of receiving the funding, we have to submit the state's 5-year plan on how we are going to get service to every unserved location in the state. And then at that point, early next year, we will know our allotment. And then within 180 days of the allotment being announced, we have to submit an initial proposal to NTIA to essentially tell them how we're going to run our grant program and how we're going to disperse that funding. But with that, that is generally kind of an overview of the project that we are currently running, assisting OPB with in their grant, and that obviously we're expecting significant funding in the future to hopefully get to every unserved location in Georgia. With that, this is my contact information, and I think also a number of, y'all know my colleague Josh Hildebrandt, and so we always want to be available. Certainly happy to answer any questions now, but also if there's anything that comes up in the future, we'd love to have a conversation with you.
Good deal. You got any questions? Vice Chair Corbett.
Real quick, can you back up to the slide that showed the state with the blue dots on the counties? Is that the counties that are unserved?
So these specifically, and I apologize, so these, when we looked at our metrics for the counties that were eligible to participate in the Capital Projects Fund program that again had more than 2,500 unserved locations or were more than 20% unserved, these were the counties that were eligible. And then we went through a service verification process, and ultimately these were the ones that moved forward. Again, there were 44 initially that met that metric, and then following our service verification, there were 33 counties that met that final metric because we wanted to make sure that we were applying that threshold evenly across the board. If a lot of service was reported during the service verification process and it dropped below those metrics, the counties were removed so that it was fair to the counties that didn't meet those metrics for eligibility to begin with.
And on the counties that qualify, the 33, can the EMC apply for that, or does that have to come from the county?
So great question. So this is actually structured a little bit differently from state fiscal recovery funds. Based on some of the Treasury rules and their procurement standards and everything that we have seen with state fiscal recovery fund, this program is actually designed so that only an ISP or broadband network owner is eligible to apply. An EMC does fit into that category because they're going to own the network.
Counties don't have an internet service provider, some of them.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So EMCs are eligible to apply. The other thing we actually did in this program to be mindful of traditional ILEC territories are also EMC territories, because obviously we know that those traditionally don't completely go based on county line. We did allow for partnerships to be formed so that way if companies or whether that be an EMC or an ISP wanting to stay within their traditional ILEC, they did have the opportunity to partner so that if they didn't feel comfortable crossing traditional lines, they could find a partner and still apply for this.
Thank you.
Representative Bentley.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. We finally get a chance to meet.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for all your help with one of the areas in my district. But can you share, without going into full detail about these projects, if a project has already started, are they eligible for this funding?
So we have defined that in the state FAQs. The goal for this funding, as was stated in the Notice of Funding Opportunity, is to fund broadband projects that would not be possible without additional investment. If a project was substantially underway, at that point, obviously, based on our state criteria, that really did not meet the criteria that it needed additional investment for that project to actually happen. And so, based on the state FAQs that were posted on OPB's website, we drew the threshold of what was eligible and what wasn't, depending on how far a project was along in construction. So if a project has only done planning, or if they've done make-ready engineering, it would be eligible for this. If they've gone beyond any type of planning and engineering and have actually started field work, so true construction, that would not be eligible.
Okay, and a follow-up question. Relating to the funding from the Jobs Act, I think I heard you say Georgia has not received that funding as of yet. Do we have any idea when that may be coming to the state of Georgia? And I know you also mention a 5-year plan. Has that plan been submitted to the federal government also?
No, ma'am. So we have 270 days to submit our 5-year plan to NTIA once we receive our planning money, and we have not received our planning money yet from the federal government. So that will be due roughly mid next year. And then at that point, we would expect that the initial funds from the IIJA will, again, a lot of this is depending on how quickly the FCC rolls out their map, because again, we don't know our allotment yet until they complete that, and then they go through a challenge process of their own and make the funding determinations. And so it's probably going to be late 2023 or early 2024 once the state receives that funding.
Okay.
All right. Oh, Representative Jackson.
A copy of the map or a list of the communities or counties that we can get so that we can know which counties will be receiving or applying for it?
For Capital Projects Fund? Yes, sir. I'll be happy to share that with you.
Thank you.
All right, Jessica, I don't see any more questions.
Thank you.
Real quick.
So, Ms. Simmons, let me make sure I'm clear on this. If it's gonna be nearly the end of next year or 2024 before the state gets this funding, these projects that they may very well be beyond the planning and they've already turned dirt and started on these projects, and you're saying they won't be eligible for funding at that time. What am I missing there?
So those were the parameters that the state put in the notice of funding opportunity related to the Capital Projects Fund grant program that we're running currently. We have not developed our program plan or a grant plan for the IIJA funding yet, just because that is obviously a future program. And so we have not determined the metrics around that yet. What I will say is, between State Fiscal Recovery Fund funding along with the matching requirements, or well, not matching requirements, but the match that private providers put up with that, the governor awarded roughly about $400 million in February, and there was another about $330 million in private match to go along with that. Capital Projects Fund, we're expecting that that's somewhere from around $240 million. Again, the state's still receiving applications, so we don't know what the matching funds are going to look like on that. But more than anything, with those two programs combined, between the state allocating this funding along with private investment spurred by these grant programs, there's going to be more than $1 billion invested in Georgia. And that doesn't even count all of the other private money that's being invested outside of these programs. More than $1 billion announced just in 2022 for broadband expansion in Georgia. And so I agree with you. I certainly wish we could, get our funding faster from this, but this is the timetable that the federal government has laid out for the IIJA, and we certainly on our side will do whatever we can to expedite that. But ultimately, the federal government has set the timeline for when that funding is going to flow.
All right, is that it on questions? All right. Good deal. Jessica, thank y'all for what y'all are doing. It's good to see all that money out there and opportunities for people to get broadband in the very near future. So thank you. Next up, we've got AT&T, Elizabeth Reynolds. Yep, come on down. We've got AT&T and Windstream, and then we're going to hear from Valdosta State, and then that's it for today, y'all. So just hold on. All right, go ahead.
Chairman Elizabeth Reynolds, State Director of Legislative Affairs for AT&T, and I know we've had a very full and robust agenda today, so I will keep my comments brief, but thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. So AT&T's been operating in Georgia for close to 145 years at this point, and as you can imagine, our business has changed quite a bit in the last 140 years, but really in the last 1-2 years as well. Today, we have two main business focuses. We are a wireless and a wireline provider. So what does that mean? That means we are solely a phone and an internet company today. That's really important to us because it allows us to focus on our true bread and butter issues, if you will. You know, we've gone back to our core business values that frankly are what we do the best. At one point, we were expanded into quite a few different businesses, and today we're really focused on those two core values that we do the best that allows us to really streamline our investment, streamline our time and our resources to make sure that we are keeping communities connected and moving forward. AT&T has invested nearly $5 billion of our private capital in the state of Georgia in the last 3 years. And a lot of times when we talk about that number, people assume that it's largely in the metro region. But of that $5 billion, more than $3 billion was invested outside of Metro Atlanta by AT&T in the last 3 years. That would not be possible without the environment that you all have created. So thank you for continuing to promote business-friendly policies that make it possible for us to bring that level of investment to the state. It truly does make a difference. You know, especially in a national company when we're competing for dollars with other states within our footprint, Georgia always gets our outsized share because of the environment that you all have created. I'm proud to say that today we have more than 6 million miles of fiber in the state of Georgia. And for me, I'm very much a visual learner, so it helps to quantify what that looks like. That's the equivalent of going to the moon and back 12.5 times with fiber. Or it's the equivalent of wrapping that fiber around the Earth's equator 241 times, which is truly staggering. We've reached more than 1.5 million homes and businesses with AT&T Fiber today. That's in parts of more than 42 counties and 95 cities in the state. Communities like Valdosta, Thomasville, Macon, Warner Robins, Augusta, Adairsville, Social Circle, Rome, etc. And we're certainly continuing to expand and build aggressively. At the national level, AT&T has a goal to reach more than 30 million homes and businesses with fiber by the end of 2025. Now, let me be clear, I understand the need for broadband access is still very real in the state of Georgia. Chairman Chokas did a great job this morning of talking about why broadband service is so important. And we certainly know for the folks that don't have broadband today that yesterday couldn't come soon enough, to Representative Bentley's point earlier. You know, people want this service, they need this service. It really is critical for the world that we live in the 21st century today. And so we absolutely recognize that. That's why we're continuing to invest our own private dollars, but we're also really excited about the programs that Jessica just alluded to and talked to. It's always been about cost. As Jason shared earlier in his presentation, you know, these homes and businesses that we're talking about, they're these harder to reach locations where it's just never been feasible. It's harder to reach from a private provider perspective to recover that cost. And so with these volume of federal subsidies and programs that Jessica talked about, it's really a once-in-a-generation opportunity to solve that digital divide, to close the gap, to bring service to Georgians that have never had access to it before. So we're incredibly proud of the work that Georgia's doing. You know, Jessica, I'm going to brag on her for a minute. In GTA, she was very modest in her comments, but Georgia was the first to have an address-specific level map in the entire country, and you can't solve a problem if you don't know where the homes and businesses are that truly need access. So it was a big deal for GTA and DCA to create Georgia's broadband map. That was huge. And then Georgia was one of the first, if not the first, to launch our federal subsidy program, because as you know, these broadband networks, they take time to build, they take time to come online. And so we were the first to get our dollars out the door and really start awarding those programs so that we could then sooner have construction going and get people online quicker. AT&T participated in the state fiscal recovery fund. Excuse me, I get tripped up on all these different acronyms and programs, but unfortunately we were not successful in our programs, but we took those learnings back to the company, and as a result have won project awards in other states, and we have applied those learnings to our current capital projects funds application. So we're hoping for better luck this next go around, and we're very much looking forward to participating in future programs as well. And I think that's the bottom line from us, is that we are absolutely ready to be at the table, be part of the solution. We recognize that no one provider can be the solution for the state. It requires us, it requires Rhonda's members, she's here today, other ISPs like Windstream, the EMCs, all of us working together, putting skin in the game, the state, the federal government doing the same, all doing our part to close the digital divide for Georgians. To give you kind of a context of how much goes into building a broadband network, we've reached more than 1.5 million homes today. We started deploying fiber in Georgia in 2017. So roughly 5 years later to get to that number. And that's all private investment to reach that. Broadband networks, unfortunately, don't pop up overnight. They require significant investment, expertise, ongoing maintenance, and upgrading. And we're not talking about retrofitting our copper telecommunications network. We're talking about building a brand new network from scratch. And so it does require significant investment. It's one that we're committed to doing. We're proud to do it. And it also requires, on the part of the state, what I would say is, one, thank you for the business-friendly policies that you have put in place, but certainty and stability in the future is so important for us to continue making these long-term infrastructure investments. So we really appreciate your consideration of that. Real quickly, I'm just going to touch on our wireless coverage in the state, because many Georgians also use their wireless networks. Your phone is much more like a computer today than it ever has been, and so wireless mobile broadband is incredibly important as well. We're very proud to have 100% coverage of 4G LTE and 80% of Georgia's population being covered with 5G today in the state. And you can see the 5G is the dark blue on the map. And then you can see on this graph here, since 2007, which was the introduction of the iPhone, how data traffic has increased just exponentially, 730,000% on our network. During the height of the pandemic, we saw wireless traffic increase 40% year over year on our wireless network, and there's not a lot of other infrastructure networks that can handle that sudden increase in capacity and handle it well. And it was something that we were able to take in stride because of the level of investment that we continue to make into our networks in the state. Real quickly, one thing that I think is important in the conversation on broadband, we talk a lot about access, rightfully so, but it is also important to talk about adoption rates. And there are going to be some people that just don't want broadband, and that's fine. That's their prerogative. Certainly understand that. That's a business risk that we take when we decide to bring service to a community, knowing that not everyone is going to adopt the service. But it would be a real shame, as we're talking about investing significant private dollars, very significant volumes of state and federal subsidies, to bring programs to someone, bring it to their door, only to have them not adopt it because they can't afford to. The service that we know could be literally life-changing for some people. So that's what these two programs eliminate, that issue that I've just laid out. The Affordable Connectivity Program from the federal government, combined with access from AT&T, allows someone to receive 100 meg service for qualifying households for as little as $0 a month. And that's, of course, for rural and urban communities, and I'd be happy to share any information. I can send that to Leo, and he can share with members of the council as well that you can pass along to constituents. I know I went through a lot of information, tried to be very quickly at the end of the day, happy to answer any questions, but again, I think the bottom line is that we are ready to be part of the solution. We are very much committed to the state of Georgia and look forward to working with all of you to make this once-in-a-generation investment in the state. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Questions? I don't see any questions, Elizabeth. Thank you for being here, and I know it takes lots of people and lots of partners to solve all the problems of broadband across our state. So thank you for AT&T's role in doing that. So appreciate it. Next up, we've got Windstream. Deanna Perry. You've been here before. Thank you for being here again and just updating us.
I have, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. What a great afternoon to be in South Georgia. I am Dina Perry. I'm the VP of Governmental Affairs for Windstream. I'm here today to talk about the progress in which Windstream has been making in bringing broadband high-speed internet to rural Georgia. Like AT&T and some of our other ISPs here today, we are an incumbent provider. We have been serving Georgia for close to 100 years, if not more. So we've been around a long time providing a telecommunications service. Our footprint currently today, we pass over 700,000 homes and businesses. We also employ over 685 field op reps. We have added over 200 this year. Our primary core areas of focus are excellent customer service, community engagement, and migration to fiber services. Customer service has been key over the last several years as we've moved through COVID and even prior to that. It is important to Windstream that our customers have a great experience. And as such, we have been involved in the communities, being part of the communities. As I mentioned, we have over 685 field ops. That's important as you're talking about responding to customers, whether it be troubleshooting or whether it be responding to maybe a migration to fiber or new subscribers. In addition to our community involvement, our field ops live and breathe in these communities. They live there, they work there, they're part of the community. They're engaged in the community through the chambers, through economic development, and through all aspects of the community. Migration of fiber services is also important to customer service. As we migrate our customer base over to a fiber, they'll have a much robust customer experience as their internet is provided over a fiber. As we have been focusing on customer service, we have had a lot of response through our customers. These are just some comments and testimonials as to what we're hearing across the state of Georgia regarding our new focus. I think it's really not a new focus, but it's a more of awareness focus over the last several years. So this is just a couple of testimonials that we've had across the state. Part of our community engagement involves not only fiber launches. Windstream has made a significant investment over the last several years in bringing broadband services to our communities. We've had several fiber launches where we participate in the downtown area. We call on chambers with local leaders, and that's where we have invested in a fiber service so that we can bring communities up to speed. In addition, we're also holding town hall events. As part of our state physical recovery partnerships with the counties that we won in, we have also been holding town hall events so that we can not only educate the community on the service area, but also participate in a pre-registration. Some of the counties that we have held these events in is Stewart County, Lee County, Baldwin County, but for a total there's 18 counties that we were an ISP partner for the state physical recovery funds. I want to talk a little bit here about Windstream's investment. In 2021, Windstream embarked on a $2 billion investment in our infrastructure. $500 million of it was focused on Georgia. Part of that $500 million is part of those community fiber launches that I mentioned earlier. That's where Windstream, our full investment went into those communities. In order to leverage that $500 million to the fullest extent, we also participated in FCC's Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. Through the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, we found collaboration with two of the EMCs, Sumter EMC and Colquitt County. We had a significant winnings or selection of the FCC RDOF in those two EMC footprints. In order to maximize our investment, work on collaboration, and expand on our footprint, we started working with the two EMCs. I don't know if you can see the legend there, but that's significant, that legend, because ultimately, whether it's pink, blue, or green, that is going to be a service-covered area by Windstream. We're able to look at this and see this and have this kind of mapping, honestly, because of the state legislators such as you. You guys passed legislation to create a broadband availability amount that has been crucial in being effective and efficient and where these funds are being invested. And we really thank you for that. If you could drill in and see in these locations, you could actually get location specific and see where the RDOF locations are that are being funded through Windstream, and then also where the State Physical Recovery Funds locations are. The pink is Windstream's RDOF locations. The green is the State Physical Recovery Fund. The blue is where we expanded on our RDOF footprint and expanded into those areas that are eligible for the State Physical Recovery. So that's significant in how we were able to expand on our investment. Windstream has been able to enable over 220,000 locations with a gig service. Through the RDOF funding, we had winnings of over 40,000 locations throughout the state of Georgia. With the State Physical Recovery Funds combined with RDOF, we will be enabling over another 100,000 locations throughout Georgia once we complete the State Physical Recovery Program. One thing that I'd like to point out that Elizabeth talked about is being the incumbent provider has both pros and cons. There's certainly pros in that we have a large footprint, we have assets that we can leverage, but there's also a con because we've been doing this for a long time and we've been delivering internet over old legacy networks trying to keep up. When you put in perspective the growth of the demand on the bandwidth and the capacity that is expected today, it's significant. In 2009 and 2010, I worked in Northwest Georgia with another program, and at that time there was a federal funded program through NTIA called BTOP. At that time, the level of what was considered unserved was less than 1 meg. The build-out requirement was up to a 10 meg. Now when you compare that with today's standard, today we're saying if you have less than 25.3, you're considered unserved. If you have anywhere from 25.3 to 120, you're underserved. So when you think about in 2010, the expectations was a 10 down and a 1 up, and today's expectations is 100 by 20 plus. Really, when you're talking about a gig service, that's 1,000 by 1,000. So when you look at a 12-year period and that kind of demand on capacity, imagine if this had been water or sewer or electricity or even roads. How would you have been able to keep up with that kind of demand and that kind of growth? And so that's the challenge of being an incumbent provider, is that we are challenged with trying to keep up with that level of growth. So here's another example of the counties that we partnered with for the State Physical Recovery Fund. As I mentioned, it was 18 counties across the state of Georgia. Windstream's match for those 18 projects across the state was $130 million, so that was our investment in combination with the state. 18 counties, these are 2 of the counties, Twiggs and Lumpkin. The image that you see on the screen, the green area, is the service area that is covered with that State Physical Recovery Fund, and then any additional funding that Windstream is investing in addition with our RDOF. So this is the total footprint that we will have a fiber service to in these 2 counties, the green area, as a result of the capital investments that we have made and the collaboration that we have had across with our counties, or whether it's an EMC, or just pulling all things together to make for a robust and to really to expand on our investments. Lee County, Terrell County is also counties that we too received funding through the State Physical Recovery Fund. Again, the green is a representation. It's just an illustration of the service area. These are very location specific. As a result of the Georgia Broadband Availability Amount, I can't impress enough how important that is to be able to effectively and efficiently invest in these unserved locations and know exactly where your investment's going. So with that, I will take any questions. My contact information is on the screen. If you have any questions regarding Windstream in our service area, please feel free to contact me, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Everybody's getting ready to go, Dan, I guess. I don't want to, just real quick, I just want to thank y'all for your work in Colquitt County, and I know y'all have got a great partnership with our local EMC there, and just the fact that y'all have that partnership and it doesn't involve a lot of money changing hands and big contracts, and it's just getting broadband to people, and that's what it's all about. So thank you for what you do there.
Thank you, and just to echo what Elizabeth said, we recognize that, this, to bring fiber connectivity to rural Georgia, really across the state, it does require collaboration, partnerships, and it is not just one provider that's going to provide the solution. It is all of us.
That's right. Good deal. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank
All
you.
right. Last up, we've got Daryl Moore. Daryl, I know you personally. I would say best for last, but no, that's a side joke. I do know Daryl though, and worked with him in Moultrie and Colquitt County for a long time when he was at the Economic Development Authority there, and he's now at Valdosta State and doing economic development for them. And so we'll turn it over to you, Daryl. Thank you for being here.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished members, thank you for the opportunity to come visit with you today. I know I'm the last person between you and your cars and heading home, but I've got some good information I'd like to share with you, and I'll run through it as quickly as possible. Sam said I spent almost 30 years in community and economic development in rural Georgia. I spent 5 years in Waycross. I spent 21 in Moultrie. Had a lot of success in both communities and had an opportunity to go to work with Valdosta State University for a new initiative about 4 years ago. Dr. Carvajal and the cabinet created the Center for Regional Impact, and I think the reasons for that was VSU's a regional comprehensive university. It's 1 of 4 in the state. They've got a 41 county service area. I think historically they've probably done a pretty good job serving Lowndes and maybe the surrounding counties, but they really didn't branch out into the surrounding counties. And we've got 7 colleges, we've got 5 associate programs, 58 bachelor programs, 42 master programs, 7 doctoral programs, and their thought process was that a lot of the rural communities share the same issues. So if you can help one community, you may be able to modify that result to help out some others, and we created the center. Again, my background's in economic development. I knew nothing about higher ed and know a little bit more now, but learning, and I've got a lot of great support people as we go along. So what I did was first started in August, and by the end of the year, I'd met with every dean, every department head, every faculty team just to determine what was available on site, and then I got in the car and I met with leadership in all 41 counties by the end of the year. We've done over 200 projects in the 4 years that I've been there, and those projects have utilized faculty, staff, and students. It could be a student intern. We've done logos, we've had class projects, we've had as many as 8 doctors from 3 different colleges work on an existing industry retention program. And I won't go through a ton of them, but I'll give you some examples just so you'll have an idea about what we did. We had a request from a hotel, a bar, and a restaurant over on the coast. Siegel's Restaurant, Dogfish, or Captain Siegel Saloon. And we had a master's level marketing class. If you think about master's level students, many of them are already graduated, they're in their profession, they're going back to further their degree. But we had a new professor, she broke it up into 3 teams, and the research that they did was phenomenal. They looked at websites, they looked at current challenges, they looked at data from restaurants in the area and nationwide. They talked about current challenges from social media, had tons of demographics, and everything was sourced back to the original information, so the customer actually had a lot that they could work off of when they got the full report. They went as far as trying to identify, I guess, inspiration pieces for what they wanted their bar, their restaurant, how they wanted their waiters to dress, the dishes, how they wanted them served, and gave them menu recommendations and pricing recommendations to make them more profitable and more attractive for the market. Another project is a downtown revitalization plan for Adel. We did this through a public administration class last year, and again we had a group of students that worked on it. The first thing we did was we worked with the Downtown Association and tried to identify blighted or underutilized buildings, talked to them about what they would like their downtown to look like in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years down the road, and started trying to plan out where they want restrooms or parking or stage or other amenities, 3 years, 5 years down the road, so they could start making intentional investments that would have a cumulative effect, positive impact on their downtown. Students were from all over South Georgia, all over Georgia, so they brought back some ideas from their hometowns. That was another benefit of having the students involved. Many of them visited Adel before and after when we made the presentation, but they gave them some suggestions on things that they could do to make their downtown more attractive. They also looked at social media and some other marketing initiatives trying to drive traffic into the community. Healthcare is critical for South Georgia. The last project I worked on in Moultrie was with PCOM. It's a 4-year medical school that's in Moultrie, Georgia. I never would have dreamed we'd have a 4-year medical school in South Georgia, much less Moultrie, but Jim Matney, our hospital CEO, threw it out there and just kept working on it. Had a great team that worked on it, and I think somebody had mentioned having the residents and the students practicing in South Georgia, and that's exactly what we want. This is a pipeline program for healthcare industries and hospitals throughout South Georgia. If you can educate them there, keep them there for the residency, they're likely to stay in South Georgia, and that was the main goal that we were trying to accomplish. 2 other initiatives I've been involved in for almost 4 years. There's a Southwest Georgia Healthcare Partnership and a Southeast Georgia Healthcare Partnership. It basically runs through our 41 county area, but we've been meeting for about 4 years. We meet monthly with healthcare providers, with people that are looking for employees, and then all of the partners that are educating the employees from technical colleges, your colleges, ABAC, Valdosta State, Albany State, and trying to match up resources and really sharing best practices and ideas. This is from a summit that we did last year. We brought in probably 300 people from all over South Georgia. We've got another one planned for February, which will be larger because we're consolidating both groups. So it will be a comprehensive South Georgia Healthcare Summit where you can share best practices and ideas from the employer standpoint as well as the supply side from the educational standpoint. 2 other projects, and I'll try to get a little bit better visual on this, just to give you a little bit of an idea about what we have been doing for our 41 county area. Lee County approached us about a year ago about Silicon Ranch, and I know that's come up several times today. And their county commission really wanted to know what the economic impact was, which is fairly easy to do, but they also wanted to know what the impact would be on their ad valorem taxes from an agricultural standpoint, what it would be from a farming standpoint, and from an aesthetic standpoint. And we had a professor in public administration that prepared that report, went and presented to them, and I think they've used that as they're moving forward, trying to evaluate additional applications or other companies that want to invest in Lee County. The visual on the right is Camden Connection. They got ARPA money, and they engaged us through their Family Connection to do a community-wide survey to determine where they could invest their ARPA money to have the highest impact on low to moderate income residents. So one thing that was a little bit unique, we had a county-wide map, and rather than somebody putting in their address, they said you live in Zone 1, Zone 2, Zone 3, because a lot of people aren't going to share their address. But then they were also able to collect a lot of information from the respondents as to had they been impacted from a school situation, had they been laid off, was their household finances changed in any way, did they lose their house? And they're using that information to really target what their needs are in their population to have the biggest impact from the ARPA money that they're receiving. I mentioned having multiple clients. We've got a Valdosta Regional United Way that serves 10 counties throughout South Georgia. He approached us about surveying some of their counties, and we used the base of the Camden County survey to customize it to meet his needs and turn it around fairly quick. So that's one example of how we've had a project where we could really have multiple beneficiaries of it by working with our faculty, staff, and students. Last thing I'll talk about on the local side is leadership. Locate South Georgia was founded probably about 10 years ago. We had a consortium of about 11 counties, and it was an economic development marketing initiative, and I was part of that organization. About 7 or 8 years ago, the Georgia Chamber in Fanning had grant programs, and they offered local leadership programs that they were going to fund through the Chamber in Fanning for 1 year for 5 communities, and they offered 3 regional programs. And we were fortunate that we received a local award and a regional award, and it enabled us to create a 21-county regional leadership program. Fanning was great. They helped us put the program together. They provided structure, and we really modeled it after Locate South Georgia. We're into our 7th class right now. We're close to 200 graduates, and it's really providing tremendous networking opportunities for South Georgia leaders to work together to address local needs and really partner and grow their communities. Although we have a 41 county service area, we want to take advantage of the resources that we have when available to have a statewide impact, and I think we've done that on 2 or 3 instances. The first is the complete count marketing for the 2020 census. I was also part of the first Archway community when we were in Moultrie, and we had a complete count committee in 2010 before it was even a thing. So I had some experience there, and I went to Dr. Carvajal and asked him if we could provide resources, census resources for all 41 counties. And it took him a minute to determine the benefit, but when you look at $675 billion in federal funds each year for local, state, and governments and schools and health care, it equates to $2,300 per year or $23,000 per job, and that was back in 19. That number's much higher now with all of the additional federal money that's coming into every state in the union. We worked with the Governor's Complete Count Committee on that program. Rusty Haga with DCA was one of the co-chairs, worked closely with him. We went to meetings all over the state, and we ended up supporting counties outside of our service area. We had counties from Middle Georgia, from North Georgia, Augusta, that wanted us to help them create their plans, and we ended up working with 55 counties. We had color room pages for the school systems. We did 43,000 table tents for restaurants, 65,000 posters. All bilingual, Spanish and English. So that was a big impact, and I know we counted tens of thousands of new Georgians that would not have been counted were it not for the efforts of the local complete count committees. The other thing that we started on about 1.5 years or 2 years ago is the Governor's Rural Strike Team. We've been providing support for them shortly after their inception. Brian Marlowe and I worked together when I was in Moultrie and he was in Tifton. He's the director of that organization. He reached out to me and 2 or 3 other people to help them with different aspects of what their goals were. And this is from Brian's slides, but I'll read through them quickly. They wanted to survey rural economic development professionals, facilitate regional focus groups, map strategic assets in rural Georgia, assist communities with the developing marketing plans, recruit consultants, prospects for strategic assets, conduct community visits, provide project management support, and develop a community readiness index. We've done several of those items. We did complete a community readiness index last year, which grades local communities on 6 different pillars of economic development. So it's a self-assessment, but it's a tremendous tool when you're working with a community on what their needs are, what their opportunities are. Every community is different. Everybody has different strengths and weaknesses, and what our goal is from VSU and from the center is that every community be the best community that they can be. And having that tool is a good way to get a good snapshot before you start working with them. You've got the 12 economic development and DCA service regions throughout the state. Over the course of the last year, we've conducted focus groups with rural communities, and that would be communities with less than 50,000 population in 11 of the 12 regions. And the reason we didn't do Region 3 is there's not a rural community in Region 3. So most of the regions had anywhere from 5 to 10 communities that participated in the focus groups. I think the only one that had a really light attendance was Region 12, and if I remember correctly, they only had 3 rural communities in that region, but that's the coastal region. We got a lot of great information from those focus groups and could determine where some of the needs were different from a regional perspective than they were statewide. And we also came up with several suggestions or several we realize that some statewide needs that we hopefully will be able to address to make communities more competitive from an economic development, community development standpoint. This is something that I'm proud of. Again, I've been in economic development for over 30 years. I've been to IADC, I've been to basic economic development classes, been to Georgia Tech's economic development classes, been to Ohio, Oklahoma, all over, and they're all great programs, but what we wanted to do to serve rural Georgia communities was a little bit unique. It's a great quote from Jim Clifton: "The coming jobs war, mayors, legislators, and elected leaders of every city, town, and village on the earth must realize that every decision they make should consider the impact, first and foremost, on new jobs. The jobs war is what should get city leaders up in the morning, what they should do all day, and what should keep them from getting to sleep at night." We use that as a premise for a Rural Development Institute, and it was a partnership with VSU, retired economic and community development professionals, and I was really humbled by the response that I reached out to friends that I'd worked with 10, 15, 20 years ago. Many of them had been retired, and said, "Would you like to help us out with this program?" And everyone agreed to help, committed to help with the planning, either serving as a mentor or speaking at the event over the 3-day event. So we had a tremendous response from economic developers all over the state. Wanted to prepare communities and economic development teams in Georgia's rural communities, and again wanted to make them be the best that they could be. Got a short welcome video from Governor Kemp. He tried to attend but could not make it. This is as loud as it's going. Thank you.
I want to thank those who poured their time and energy into making this important program happen. Throughout my time in office, we have seen exciting projects come to counties all across Georgia. I'm happy to report 60% of jobs created and 78% of investments made in the first half of fiscal year 22 were located outside the metro Atlanta area. I am proud of the partnership between the VSU Center for Regional Impact and the Governor's Rural Strike Team. While we have made great strides in bringing jobs and opportunities to our rural counties, we will not rest on our laurels. During this class, it is my hope you will find new ways to further that good work and build on your partnership. As you return to your communities, know that we are behind you and excited about the future. Have a productive program. Thanks for all you're doing, and God bless.
Give you a little idea, we were soliciting applications from rural counties all over Georgia. There wasn't any specific geographic location that we were targeting. The only requirement was they had to be counties of less than 50,000 people. We selected up to 10 counties to participate in May. The communities had to complete the Community Vitality Index before they came, and that covered site selection, retention, education, workforce, infrastructure, either built and civic infrastructure, population, demographics, leadership, and your charm factors. The cost to attend was $2,500 per community. Each community could bring teams of 5 or 6 people, and that was the only expense they had when they were there. We had the 3-day summit in Valdosta in early June. Really some things that set it apart was we required a team setting. Anybody that's ever worked in local economic development knows that it's extremely challenging to land a project if the city, county, and the development authority is all on the same page. If they're fractured, it's nearly impossible. So we required that each team have a representative from the city, the county, and the development authority. And their other 3 board members could be the school superintendent, a bank president, another board member, another councilman, whoever they wanted that they thought would best fill out their team. We had tremendous speakers. They were on downtown development, and on retail, on tourism, on economic development, on capacity building. And after each session, rather than breaking up, we had mentors that volunteered to work with their team for 3 days. So after each session, they sat down with their team, they reflected on what they had just learned, they wrote down things that they'd like to take back to their community that they could have a positive impact. At the end of the session, after the 3 days, the mentor sat down with them and they prioritized all of those goals. So for every community that participated, we had 1 to 4 pages of bulleted points that they'd like to work on when they got home. We took that list, and over the summer we worked with our deans and our department heads, and we've identified resources to work on 19 projects that are ongoing right now, and we've got 5 more projects that we're going to kick off in the spring. So we're doing projects from Dawson County up in the mountains, Twiggs and Crawford around middle Georgia, and we've got 5 spread out across South Georgia right now. So we're doing projects all over. Got one more I'll try. This just gives you a brief overview.
What I've seen is that the rural parts of states don't get the attention that the interstates do and the large cities do. And this was an effort to really try to focus out into some of the rural communities, smaller towns in Georgia, and to basically engage them in a process that helps them move their communities forward. The model, of course, is we've got 8 to 10 communities who are participating in this, but they come as a team, each of the communities, and we have them sit as a table as a team. And that's so that they can not only listen and then interact and talk among themselves and say, okay, when we get back home, here's some things that we need to work on.
I really think it was not only who we had around the table, but also the mentors that we had around our table to really make sure we're moving in the right direction, drive the conversation, and bring us together, and make sure that we understand and are capitalizing on all the information that's presented.
They're learning from each other, from the community to community, but having the leaders here, both the mayors and the county commission chairman and the development authority, has caused them to come up with some very creative ideas on how they might move forward. I just am so excited that they are agreeing to listen to any idea and sort of discuss
cross-section of people who can take back what they learned from here and really work together to move the community to the next step. Because when you come away from this, you really will have a lot of new ideas, you'll have a lot of momentum, and it's going to take a lot of people to work together to make that capitalize on that opportunity.
You know, the hope for doing something like this is that each community will say, you know, there are some things that we need to work on. There's some areas that we can improve. There's some projects that we can tackle when we get that. There are some people that we can include that we haven't included before. So I think if we see those things happen in these communities that have been through this, then we'll say, okay, this is a good first step.
Told my boss I don't think we could have been at a better spot after the event than where we were. I've had several people say it was the best event they've ever been to. This is Dr. Keith Jones in Mitchell County. As you will see, I made it very clear to the board that this is the most impactful training that I've had as a county commissioner or in any professional position. We had multiple responses like that, and I think we're at a great spot. Now it's our opportunity and our challenge to make sure we complete all these projects, do great work for them, and they continue on. That was the goal, that they have some momentum. They're organized. A lot of the committees are already meeting weekly, monthly, and already started working on projects that we're not even helping them with right now. Before I move on real quick, I wanted to just mention, and I hope I don't leave anybody out, we had volunteers from ACCG, GMA, Georgia Power, ECG, EMC, Retail Strategies, retired economic developers that volunteer their time that I worked with 25 years ago, site selection consultants, DCA, and Strike Team. They all volunteered to either be community mentors or speakers, and they all volunteered their time. They spent 3 days to help have an impact on rural communities throughout South Georgia. Couple of projects, and I won't belabor this. We've got 19 underway right now, 5 more in the spring, but we've been doing downtown assessment, strategic planning. Top right corner is an interesting picture, Camilla, Mitchell County. They've got 4 cities, Sale City, Baconton, Pelham, and Camilla in Mitchell County. And from talking with their group, they don't know each other and they don't really talk to each other. So we had about a 2.5-hour session with them the other day, and it's a first step, but we had 35 participants from Mitchell County that came and shared what they thought was right with Mitchell County and what they thought was wrong with Mitchell County. And it's something that we want to continue working with them and start getting some more specific goals for them. Bottom right corner, we're doing a tiered downtown redevelopment plan for Alma and Bacon County. You see the 4 different colors. They've got different roadway priorities that they want to do on that as far as walkways and sidewalks and so forth. But we're doing historic tourism, recreation authorities, trying to help some of them get that, city-county relations. And again, we're just in a good spot moving into next year. We will do the class again next year to be the second or third week in June. We've picked up Georgia Power as a corporate sponsor this year. We've got a national sponsor that's reached out to us. We had an opportunity to go present what we were doing through the center with RDI in Washington, D.C. in June, and I think we've got some other potentials there. So we've got a lot of momentum going into next year. Again, I'll be glad to answer any questions anybody might have about the center or about RDI.
All right, any questions? They may be scared too, Daryl. I appreciate all that information and appreciate what y'all are doing. And I know if anybody's got any questions, everybody knows Merritt, and they'll give her a holler, or there's your contact up there. So thank you for what you're doing, and appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
All right, for committee members, we finally made it to the end. Thank you, diehards, for sticking in there with us. I know everybody that skipped out is probably watching it at home on their computer. No, thank y'all for being here, and thank everybody that's presented. This is great information. We look forward to taking all this back and trying to see what we can come up with from from a recommendation standpoint to move forward as we get into January and start our legislative session. So there'll be more info to come as we try to meet together one more time, either before the end of the year or in January when we start back. So thank everybody for being here, and we're adjourned.